Okay, so we are live. Lots happened this week. Obviously, yesterday in the F Formula Two GP2 accident at Spa that killed Anton Hubert. Questions will be asked, obviously, about the safety of single seat race cars on racetracks. We saw a massive crash in the IndyCar at Pocono a few weeks ago that raised concerns about IndyCar safety on certain tracks. And what I noticed about the Radeon section is they've taken of Spa, they've taken the gravel traps out, and they've changed the layout of the barriers. And what has basically occurred here is very similar to what happened to Nico Rosberg a couple of years ago when he had a puncture and crashed at that section. It's a high speed section. You go anywhere between 170 and 200 mile an hour through that section, and when you hit the barrier, there's nothing to decelerate you before the barrier, and of course those safety padded barriers spring you back out like a cannonball, basically into oncoming traffic. They don't absorb and keep you in there; they fire you back out. Questions will also be asked about the strength of the chassis and the design features of the cars, of not just GP2 but also F1 and other single seat formula that we've had. We've obviously had Billy Munger lose both his legs in Formula 4 here in the UK. So there's a lot of questions to be asked about single seat open wheel racing. And while this is the first death to actually take place on a Grand Prix weekend since Ayrton Senna in 1994. Obviously, Jules Bianchi died of injuries sustained 9 months after his accident at Suzuka. There are questions to be asked about the Halo device as well, and also questions to be asked about the nose cone design of some of the cars, because the guy who collided with Hubert broke both his legs and lost a severe amount of blood, and was also severely injured and is still in an intensive care Liège hospital. Massive accident, though. Massive accident, but it also does raise questions about the circuit design and these removal of gravel traps at a lot of the older circuits. And a lot of the newer circuits are designed without gravel traps at all, with these tarmac runoff areas that don't actually decelerate you as fast as a gravel trap. So those questions will continue to be asked about track safety and open wheel racing and motor racing in general. Now, motor racing is an exceptionally dangerous occupation. You can never make it fully safe. We've seen a lot of deaths in IndyCar in the last decade. So open cockpit, open wheel racing is really dangerous stuff. And while we've been very thankful that in F1 and the GP2 series and things like that, there've been not many fatalities on a Grand Prix weekend. Surtees, his son was killed at a Formula 3 weekend, I think at Alton Park about 5-10 years ago, when a loose tyre hit him in the head. So there are still questions to be asked about the ongoing safety and things like that of single seat open wheel racing. Now, last night I watched the Champions Hockey League, which is the ice hockey equivalent of the Football Champions League, between the Belfast Giants and Augsburg Panther. It was a really good game. Either side could have won. I felt Belfast for periods were the better side. Augsburg were for periods the better side, and it was a very even end-to-end encounter. Both teams played exceptionally well. It also highlights the growing quality of the Elite League, and the amount of ground it's made up in the last 5-10 years on the other European leagues, such as the German league, the DEL. And while the Giants couldn't come away with a win, they lost in overtime. They got a point, and they could have won that game. There was a controversial goal disallowed at the end of the third period for a high stick above the crossbar. Replays were inconclusive, but surprising that the referees didn't go with their on ice decision, which was a good goal. And that's not being biased as a British hockey fan for a British team, but it was an interesting call, interesting debating point. I'm sure more calls like that will happen in the season, not just in European ice hockey, but over in North America in the NHL. There's going to be some really controversial video review calls. We're going to have a lot of discussion over, video refs and a lot of sports. VAR is still being a hotly debated point in English football and its implementation and use. But in ice hockey, the video official, the review, decided to scratch that goal off. So that's a debating point. Belfast went on to lose the game 3-2. They could have won the game 3-2. There's about a minute and a half left when they scored that goal. And it will be interesting to see, clarification from the officials about why goals like that are very, very tight tight margins where there's not a clear, obvious angle to prove otherwise. What the guidelines are for the officials, if they've given or not given a goal, and if they reverse the decision, what the guidelines are. It'll be very interesting to get clarification and how open the various governing bodies of leagues and competitions are going to be. And the football news, Bury's ex-players and staff are planning to take legal action against the EFL. And with the whole situation at Bury Football Club and what happened and the expulsion from the Football League, a lot of questions have already been asked of the EFL. We've got the Ministry for Sport involved, we've got the local MP, and we're having threats of legal action from a variety of parties who had a vested interest in keeping Bury going. There's also they're trying to find a way to appeal the decision to expel them from the Football League. So all that is exceptionally interesting. They've also been thrown out the FA Cup as well, but a lot of questions are being asked yet again of sports governance and how the EFL allowed the situation at Bury to go right to the wire and then eventually for the unfortunate outcome to take place, whereas Bolton were given that extra 14-day extension when they also had the 5 p.m. deadline. They suddenly were allowed to be saved. So a lot of questions of the EFL and their handling of both situations. But I do feel there could be a domino effect for other clubs, not just in League One, who are going to lose out on that fixture against Bury home and away, but also in the long run with clubs with transfer fees and agents' fees and players on loan and things like that. There is going to be a knock-on effect. There's now a lot of players out of work. So that's another interesting point. So squad sizes and the PFA having to basically assist players through this time. There are now talks to bring in some kind of salary cap system. We already have financial fair play in professional football in Europe, and it's not working properly. So there are calls for UEFA and the various domestic football associations to tighten up on spending rules. And I think that should apply for all leagues because it's all well and good saying we're going to bring in a spending cap or a salary cap for the lower levels, but then if you're not going to bring it in for the higher levels, then it's a mute point because clubs will continue to overspend. And football, for some reason, is a sport built upon debt. It's not built upon profits at this point in time. It appears to be built upon debt, and the pyramid will collapse. The bubble will burst if this is not resolved quickly. I think the questions that will be asked of the EFL are going to be deep. There's going to be issues over governance, organisation. The EFL as an organisation, it's the rules that it has in place to assist clubs that are going through the situation, and whether the policies have to change, and whether there should be an internal investigation of how the EFL handled the situation. Because it seems from the outside that the EFL pretty much wanted the outcome for Bury to be them getting expelled from the Football League. It seems the EFL didn't actually want to have a comprehensive solution for Bury, but they did want to have a comprehensive solution for Bolton. But questions will be asked about the fit and proper persons test, regular auditing, regular health checks of clubs' finances. A whole range of issues will be brought up in any investigation. And when you have the Minister for Sport getting involved as well now, that's a really interesting point that people, I don't think, were expecting it to get high as government level, but it has. So that's an interesting one. In the NRL, we're getting a better picture of who's going to make the finals out of the top 8. The Newcastle Knights are going through a bit of a shambolic period with Nathan Brown being sacked as coach and members of the board going, and there's a whole rancor about that club. Did the players play to get the coach sacked? A whole host of issues down in the NRL. The NHL, the preseason hasn't started yet. Obviously, the Evgeny Kuznetsov drugs test is the biggest news to come out of the off-season. And it's news I think the NHL didn't want to come out, really. A player getting suspended for recreational drug misuse. I think that's something that the NHL didn't really want to have on their plate, is the debate about recreational drug use with players. It's been an ongoing debate for 30, almost 40 years, and still needs to be resolved. Honestly, it's not just an NHL thing; it's a much wider sporting issue. But there are issues there. Obviously, the football season is now a month old. The transfer windows are now all shut. Um, Not as busy a transfer window as I thought it would be at the beginning of the summer. The Neymar transfer to PSG is still the highest transfer of all time for fee paid. The rumours about Gareth Bale and Neymar circulating whether they will move on from their respective clubs. They could move on in January. It could be where they do move if they do. Wayne Rooney going to Derby and the betting firm that are basically supplementing his income, and the debate about gambling companies and sponsoring of sport. That's another big debate that doesn't seem to be disappearing anytime soon. And again, there's a question about where's the money coming from for these sponsorship deals and the transparency, and is it the right companies doing it, and a whole host of things. But there's contractual arrangements, and breach of contract results in legal lawsuits that take a lot of time and money and distract from the bigger issues. Contract law is exceptionally complicated, but I can see there is a big issue, especially with professional football and the use of betting companies as sponsors of tournaments, competitions, and clubs. In other countries, for example, in France, alcohol sponsorship at sporting events is banned. Obviously, we went through the tobacco ban on sports sponsorship. That's another thing that's happened over the years, and in my lifetime, is tobacco sponsorship is now gone. Although e-cigarettes and things like vapes, you can sponsor with them, but not tobacco. So there's a few loopholes in there. Alcohol sponsorship in France is not allowed. But it seems that gambling companies may no longer be allowed to advertise at sporting venues and sponsor tournaments and competitions and players individually, whatever it may be. So that debate is going on. But we've been here with tobacco and alcohol sponsorship before. Don't be surprised if gambling and betting companies also end up on that sponsorship blacklist, where there's laws in place to say you cannot have a company that specializes in gambling or betting sponsoring a sporting event. I think horse racing and greyhound racing will be exempt because those sports rely heavily on the gambling industry for their revenues. But I think football, especially as a sport, has a massive issue. I think rugby league has a problem as well. And we've seen a whole host of players come out and admit that they have a gambling issue. And it's not a new phenomenon. It's an ongoing issue that's been ongoing for quite a few years, with high-profile sportsmen who've come out and said they had a gambling addiction. So that's something to bear in mind. But all told, I think it's, apart from yesterday at Spa and obviously the football with the VAR controversy at several games, the rugby autumn, the summer internationals, the warm-ups, Ireland are now top of the Rugby Union World Rankings. And that means we've had like 3 or 4 changes to the world rankings of Rugby Union in 3 weeks. So it's getting a bit bizarre, who's the top ranked team in the world. I think Ireland, Wales, and New Zealand, I think, all deserve that moniker. I think South Africa are in the top 4 as well. But world rankings are as we know, flawed. They're a flawed system because it also relies on the strength of opposition that you play, plus percentage of wins versus losses, and a whole host of other factors put in there. But it will be interesting to see how close those rankings are to the final World Cup results, and who finishes where, and who wins the Rugby World Cup in Japan in November. It's going to be really interesting to see how those world rankings tally up with the final positions of teams, where they get to the knockout stages, group stages, and on to the final. But if we can, but apart from that, it actually has been a reasonably quiet week in sport. I would say there's been a few things happening at the US Open. Medvedev has been fined for unsportsmanlike behaviour, for example. Little things like that, nothing overly insane. Christian Wade has scored his first touchdown in NFL preseason, because the NFL kicks off in a couple of weeks as well. And of course, it is the 1st of September. Who would have thought that August would have flown by so quickly? There were a few transfers coming through on European deadline day yesterday. Nacho Monreal going back to Spain being one. But in all honesty, there's not really a lot been happening in sport apart from the ongoing issues with the EFL and Bury and Bolton. And of course, that horrific accident at Spa yesterday in the GP2, which has killed one and seriously injured another driver who's still in intensive care in hospital. So there's some interesting things to debate and look at. Obviously, the Europa and Champions League draws for the main group stages have been made, and you can debate: are they easy groups for some clubs and harder groups for others? But it's a cup competition, and you've got to play what's in front of you. At the end of the day, I mean, you could argue that some of the clubs have got an easier draw than others, but you have to play what's in front of you on the night, and we can look into strength of group and how that affects certain clubs and what's predictions. But predictions in sport are really flawed. You can use advanced statistics to predict as much as you want, but then it comes down to the actual players taking part and the athletes taking part to produce the goods on the day. It's like the St Helens lost to Warrington in the Challenge Cup. You look at the form going in. Warrington's league form had been absolutely atrocious, and St Helens had only lost 3 games all season. St Helens folded on the day. They were not clinical enough. They had a lot of mistakes in their play. Warrington were more accurate with an injury-ravaged side, let's not forget. And they pulled out the goods on the big day. It wasn't the most free-flowing final at times, but then there were times when it were. But as I say, you can be given the label of favourites, but it's what you do on the actual day that counts. It's not what you've done in the previous 5, 6, 7 months. It's what you actually do on the day. And St Helens on the day just were not good enough, plain and simple. So there is that. Right. What else is there to discuss? The VAR debate. Okay, we're waiting for a few questions to come in. We could discuss the VAR debate and is it being properly implemented? I think VAR isn't necessarily the problem. I think it's the wording of some of the rules, such as offside and handball. I think the new interpretation of offside and handball, as we saw in the Women's World Cup, has brought about more controversy than solution, and hasn't helped the flow of the game. I think when you're introducing a new rule set or a new technology to a sport, there's going to be some teething issues. There's going to be a few controversial decisions, especially if it's to do with officiating. But on the VAR side of things, I think VAR itself, in principle, is a good system. It may not be being implemented correctly, and I will say that. But then you have to look at the changing of what is deliberate and not deliberate handball, and offside, and the interpretation of phases of play and activity, and interfering with play and all this BS. The wording of the rules hasn't helped, and the interpretation that referees have hasn't helped with implementing VAR and making it a better system. A lot of fans are getting frustrated with the video assistant referee VAR. I think FIFA need to look at how they've worded the offside rule, the handball rule, interfering in play, a whole host of other things as well. The new penalty taking rule, which the Premier League has said it's not going to enforce, where the goalkeeper has to stand in his line, they're not enforcing it. So leagues are cherry picking which new rules they want to enforce as well. If you're going to have a global sport, you need to have a global standardized rule book, and unfortunately, you can't, as it's been proven. It shows that it's the clubs versus the associations at this point. That's not helping the implementation of a new system. But I think the bigger problem is the wording of the offside rule, the wording of the hand rule, the interpretation of said rules, and where we go from here. I honestly don't know. We'll have to see what happens this season, if there's any more really egregious decisions. Aston Villa had one yesterday that was blatantly, obviously incorrect. We'll have to see what happens going forward, if there's any more debating points and outcomes of games, such as the FA Cup, League Cup, Champions League, Europa League, things like that, where it is a knockout kind of competition. There's going to be instances in the season where I think you could argue that it might have an impact, but we'll have to see what happens. I think there's there is a growing, I think, not dislike but frustration with sports fans, football fans especially, with VAR. Um, it's but there's also the issue of racism aimed at players as well. The players have a trade union called the PFA. The PFA is not taking strong enough action. It's just giving out worded statements that are virtue signaling at this point. I think you honestly need the players to go on strike and refuse to play games until the FA or UEFA or whoever is the governing body in charge of said competition, takes more affirmative action, because what we are seeing for the last month or so is some pretty heinous stuff aimed at players of colour, and it it's becoming more prevalent and it's becoming more accepted, and it's not right. And I think we as fans also need to support the players. The clubs need to take tougher action on offenders, be it in the stands or online, and the authorities need to take greater action, because it what may start as words can lead to violent action, and we are not that far away from another Eric Cantona incident with the Kung Fu kick at Crystal Palace back in 1994-95. We are getting close to a Cantona-esque outburst from a player. We saw it in France with Patrice Evra after he was had loads of abuse hurled at him at an open training session. I think we are an instant or two away from a player reacting violently because the authorities aren't taking action against the abuse that they are receiving. And a lot of sportsmen take a lot of abuse. It's more than just racism. It's homophobia. It's death threats. It's just general crap. It's the social media companies and the media as well, because the mainstream media helps fuel this as well. They need to take some responsibility for the content that is on their websites. They need to take responsibility for what they publish, what they allow to be published. And we could be a game away from a player reacting viciously to abusive chants from the stands, let alone the abuse they receive on social media. We are that close to having an angry reaction from a player or players. At the moment, football seems to punish players who threaten to walk off or refuse to play when they're receiving racist or homophobic or whatever sectarian abuse. We've seen Rangers this week have a portion of their stadium closed for European games. They've been hit with a partial stadium closure by UEFA over sectarian chanting. Legia Warsaw also may face sanction for their part in a very heated clash over two legs in the Europa League qualifying stages. There were some unsavoury scenes from both sets of fans. While not the worst that we have seen in European football, it's a dark reminder that religion, colour of one's skin, someone's nationality has a big impact when it comes to some fans. I use the word fan loosely. I think the term moron is more appropriate in this case. But it is an ongoing issue, and Rangers have been hit with a partial stadium closure, which is a regular occurrence, it seems, for Celtic and Rangers to have partial stadium closures for sectarian or racist chants from their so-called fans, which is just, in 2019, it's mind-boggling that this still continues and this is still accepted. And the clubs don't seem to really take that serious an action. They just virtue signal on Twitter. They say, yeah, we ultimately condemn this, but then week after week, it's a reoccurring, regurgitated theme with Rangers and Celtic, and it's not getting fixed. It's not going away. It's not disappearing. It's still there. It's still prevalent, and it's still ongoing. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of willingness, let's say, to deter deter fans or so-called fans from real abusive chanting, and it's an ongoing thing. It's been going on for too long in Scottish football. It seems to be on the rise again. It's not going away. So that's an issue that Celtic and Rangers will face this season is partial stadium closures. It's but the fines that UEFA dish out are pretty pathetic when it comes down to uh, the fines they dish out for uh, racist chanting or racist behaviour. They're actually less than what Nicholas Bentner got for wearing his Paddy Power boxes at Euro 2012. And it just shows the flaws that I think are there with the disciplinary policies that UEFA have. And players, as I say, we're a step away from a player or players reacting violently to racism from the stands or even from other players for that matter. We are that close to having a reaction, and whether action then happens, then it'll be too late because the damage has been done. The player has reacted. The player has responded to the chanting, to the abuse. It seems to be several clubs that are more affected than others as well, but it's been an ongoing thing. It's got worse and worse over, I would say, the last 18 months. Definite spike in incidents at grounds, and there are several clubs, which I won't necessarily mention, who seem to be worse than others when it comes to these kind of antics. If we look at let's have a look on the news quickly. Let's see what's actually happening in the world of sport. But we've got a few minor sporting things going on. Charles Leclerc obviously won his first F1 Grand Prix, beat Hamilton in Spa. Rangers lost to Celtic in the end. There's not really a lot happening. There's not really a lot happening in the world of sport, really. Wales have named their Rugby World Cup squad. Reece Patchell is one of the fly halves who will be going the World Cup. Richarlison scores 2 goals as Everton have beaten Wolves. It ended 3-2. So Wolves are actually struggling at the start of this current Premier League season. Will the Europa League have an impact on their final league finishing position? That's an interesting one. Let's have a look at what else is happening on the old news wires. Let's have a look at the headlines. But really, it's been apart from the incident at Spa, it's been a very, very slow news day, really. Yeah, Medvedev, as I said, was fined for his offensive gesture towards fans. But not a lot going on. Arsenal play Tottenham at 4:30, so that kicks off. The North London derby kicks off in about 10 minutes' time. And there's been some speculation. I think it's been whipped up by the media to a certain extent over Pochettino's future at White Hart Lane. Still trophyless under Pochettino. While they have improved as a side, they can't seem to take that next step and win some silverware. I think that could prove crucial in the direction the team takes, whether they keep that core together or whether they have to sell players on. But I think some of those players do want to win silverware eventually. It will be interesting, if it's just speculation by the media or if there is generally unrest within Spurs. Pochettino, it's an interesting one. He made Southampton a better side when he was coaching there. When he took over Tottenham, yes, he has improved them, but that lack of silverware is, I think, what's defining his time in charge at White Hart Lane. they've lost ground to Liverpool and Man City, I feel. Leicester are, I think, the best of the rest, steaming up behind them and could overtake them. So, and these clubs are winning the silverware and they're not. And this is, I think, where this has to be a defining season. Um, I can't see some of those Tottenham players sticking around if they fail to win silverware for another season. I think some of them want to win, and they will go where they can to win. It doesn't matter what league. I think they will just go to a club that is competing for trophies in their domestic or European competitions, because Tottenham, while they are there at the beginning of a season, they fall away by the end, and that is something that is also, I think, affecting the England national side. I think we've seen that in pressure situations, England have fallen away, and that's partly to do with the heavy reliance on Tottenham players who haven't quite got over that winning line yet and actually got that piece of silverware to say, like, I've won a Premier League, I've won an FA Cup, I've won a League Cup, I've won a Champions League or a Europa League, or even if they've at some point played in a European League and won trophies, they can say to Southgate, I've won something. So that's interesting. Obviously, we've got some qualifiers coming up next weekend for the Euros. It's going to be interesting against Bulgaria and Kosovo. So there's two sides that England haven't played much in recent years. I don't think they've ever played Kosovo before. So that's going to be interesting to see how Southgate sets up for two tough games. Bulgaria are a decent side. They've got some pedigree to them, some history to them. Kosovo is a relative unknown, but again, you're going to have to beat these sides in order to win silverware. You're going to have to beat very prickly, difficult to break down opposition who may not be the most free flowing and attack minded tactically. And in order to get to the top of the tree, you got to beat what's in front of you. And there's going to be some difficult qualifiers, but I think England have more than enough to do more than enough over those two games and get 2 wins. Bulgaria could be a draw. Not saying that's going to be a given. Bulgaria over the years have had some great players play for that country, so that's not a given that they're going to beat Bulgaria. But England are favourites for the 2 games. But it will serve them in good stead for next year's Euros should they qualify, which is looking very, very likely because the Euros have been expanded and there's going to be some teams there that wouldn't normally have made it to the Euros or World Cups in seasons and years past. So now I'm going to open it up to any questions that anyone actually has. I've waffled on for about 30 minutes about some really boring stuff. I've been asked some questions about a few things and my views on the Champions League and Europa League draws. I don't actually have a team in Europe this season. I haven't had a team in Europe for many seasons, actually. But I think strength of draw has a part to play in a team's pathway to the later stages. But you've got to beat the team on the night that's against you. And there are some tricky games in there for the English teams and the Scottish teams. There's some tricky games in there where there could be a banana skin potentially. If Celtic and Rangers can get out of the group stages in Europe, that would be a big shot in the arm for Scottish domestic league and Scottish football in general. That's been a struggle in recent seasons is Scottish clubs getting out of the group stages of European competition and taking that next step. I think the last Scottish club to do so were Rangers in 2008. So that's something that Scottish football needs, is them to be a little bit more competitive in Europe and take that next step. Not really much else to say. I'm open to questions. It's just that time of the year where some sports their seasons are winding down, other sports are in pre-season. So it's one of them really when it comes to this time of year. When it comes to sport, the US Open has thrown up one or two controversial moments. You know, it's interesting with tennis because the US Open, I think, is the weakest of the 4 Grand Slams. I really do. I think the other 3 have I think more press around them and more interest. And I don't know what it is with the US Open, but I rarely really pay attention to the US Open. I pay more attention to Wimbledon and Roland Garros and the Australian Open in Melbourne. I think they're better supported events. I think they seem to be better supported and better watched on the various media platforms. I think there's a bigger TV and online audience, and there's a bigger crowd audience at the games. I think um, that's an interesting one. Obviously, while I'm waiting for questions, which I'm happy to take, obviously next year is the Olympics in Japan. So Japan's got a busy, a year ahead of it with the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics. Real busy year ahead. That's going to be interesting. Another debate is about sports funding. I've had questions on responses to um, videos about, can you discuss sports funding, who gets what, and all that. Do I think Jimmy Anderson will play Test cricket again? It's possible. I think obviously it's unfortunate that his calf strain has reoccurred and he's not fully fit. But he is 37. Whether next year's his last year and he goes, or maybe he goes on the winter tour, I don't know. But he's 37. He's thankfully been largely, I will say this, injury free for large portions of his career. He's the highest ever fast bowler Test wicket taker. Obviously, spinners take more wickets, but he's taken the most wickets for a fast bowler. Is his Test career? It depends. If he can get his fitness back, he's got to be in the running for a Test recall over the winter series. But players like Jofra Archer and Sam Curran and Chris Wokes, there's a lot of competition now for bowling places. Plus, he is, as I say, 37. So to push your body as a fast bowler, to that point, it takes a lot of out of a player. And the calf injury is obviously to do clearly with his run up or just the amount of miles he's put on his body over the years. Because he's a boundary fielder. Generally, he fields on the boundary. That's a lot of running. But he has been quite fortunate in that he hasn't had as many injuries as some fast bowlers and the length of his career. I remember watching his first Test match at Lords in 2003. So I saw his first ever Test wicket. I do think he still has a part to play in the Test side over the next 12 months. But I think it's up to the captain, Joe Root. It's up to the selectors, it's up to the coach, and it's up to Jimmy Anderson as well to sit down and discuss whether it's worth pushing on for another 6 to 12 months, because this could be a reoccurring injury. He has played some second 11 cricket, keep himself and get himself back in shape, but he felt a little bit uncomfortable, didn't feel quite right. And it's this stage of the season now, you don't need to risk a player. You can allow a player some rest time. He's been an outstanding player for the best part of 16 years. I think he's deserved his place as one of the all-time greats of the game. There are some other fast bowlers who could overtake his wicket total in time. Again, Jimmy Anderson is one of them, much like Glenn McGrath before him, who dominated their specialty in the game for a long period of time. There are some other fast bowlers who could overtake both Glenn McGrath and Jimmy Anderson for wicket taking. So while he set a massive bar to pass, and he took longer than McGrath to get to where he got to, that's an interesting one. But does he play Test cricket again? That's too early to say. I think they've shut him down for the summer. There's only 2 tests left and some one days and T20s. I think they're most likely going to assess him before the winter series overseas, the overseas Test series. I think that's what they're going to do. And then if he's still not right, then it could be curtains. It's a sad way for a player to end their career. But look at the impact Jofra Archer has had in a very short space of time. So the impact Sam Curran had last year and to a certain extent this year as well. I think England going forward with the bowling side of things have got some good young up and coming prospects in Sam Curran and Jofra Archer, and there are a few others as well. On the batting side of things, I think the bigger issues with England are their top order and Joe Root as captain. I think there's a lot of questions about Joe Root's captaincy and whether he's the right guy to be captain. And there are lots of issues over the the top order, because it regularly seems to me that one or two of the all-rounders have to step up, form a partnership in the middle to lower order with some of the tail enders, and be more aggressive than they need to be, because the top order can't get in, stabilize the innings, and then kick on. There is a big issue with the upper order not scoring enough runs and not establishing an innings. And then players like Wokes, Stokes, Curran, Joss Butler, who's inconsistent, they have to step in and pull out something out of the bag. Sometimes in partnership, sometimes, they're the ones getting the runs. And I think that's the problem. Hello, Mr. Anglo Man. What other questions do you have? Because I know Jimmy Anderson's a big talking point, that he has been left out for the rest of the Ashes series. But Australia has to replace Way with an all-rounder. I can't think of one. This is what I've noticed about these two sides in this series, is they're bowler heavy. There's a lot of bowling talent for both teams. The batting talent is either not performing how they should, and you could look at Australia's back lineup. You take Steve Smith out of it, the other so-called batsmen are really struggling. And England, the upper orders of both sides are really below par. They're not performing. They're not getting the runs. They're not stabilising an innings, and it's left to the lower middle orders to really dig out where the runs are coming from, and dig out a performance. I think the momentum has swung in England's favour. I'm being honest with that assessment. I think this momentum has swung somewhat to England. I wouldn't say it's gone all the way, but I think there is an issue with the batting lineups, and they're both heavily weighted to the middle order batsmen, the all rounders basically, or the wicket keepers, or even those bowlers who can bat a bit. I think that there's a definite issue with batting depth for both sides. Australia, they have obviously got the whole squad on tour, so they can, Peter Siddle, for example, he's still chugging along. But I think, both sides have had their issues. I think England had problems with the selections and various things with the administration of the game, and bits and pieces off the field. Australia have obviously had the sandpaper gate, and that's still having an impact as well, and that's impacted how the team play, and we've seen some, I wouldn't say nasty responses from crowds, both Australian and English, but I think Warner, Smith, and Bancroft haven't really, especially David Warner, haven't really won back necessarily all the hearts and minds that they could have, and David Warner hasn't really played well at all in this series. Yeah, you can ask questions about football. Absolutely. It's a multi-sport channel. If you simplify all three tests, it's Smith, draw, start. Yeah. You could say two batting performances have defined the first and third test. The second test, the weather defined it. The New York Islanders, I think Barry Trotz has definitely improved the side. I think they're more of a sum of all their parts. They haven't got one outstanding player, but they seem more balanced now that Tavares has gone, and that's weird. Franchise player moves on, team seems more balanced. It was good to see them back in the playoffs last year. I think they are a team like Buffalo, like Arizona, like Florida, that need to get back into the playoffs and have a good run in the playoffs. The first dynasty of the 80s. Winning. I think they're the first American team to win 4 Stanley Cups in a row as well, if history serves me correct, and if I'm correct on that. But again, much like Edmonton, much like Buffalo, they're living on their past glories a little bit. But Barry Trotz as general, as coach, and Lou Lamoriello as GM, I think they've got the right tandem there. And they're going to get the best out of those players. They seem to be a sum of their parts rather than some superstar players. But let's have a look at what else is coming up. The Old Firm game. Well, there was a lot of disturbances in Govan last night between Protestant and Catholic groups. Various things, a lot of sectarian violence last night in Glasgow. which was underreported in the mainstream media, by the way, but I did catch it on social media. People were uploading images of some rather nasty stuff happening in Govan. I think Celtic are still the better of the two sides. 2-0, is that a fair result? Rangers have been in the press for the wrong reasons this week, with partial stadium closure for Europa League games due to sectarian chanting, which is still an ongoing issue. Although Celtic have these problems as well. I still think Celtic are the team to beat in the SPL. If last year's anything to go by, though, I think the gap is closing between Celtic and the rest of the league. But we'll have to see what happens in this season's edition of the SPL. But Scottish football does have a lot of issues off the field to solve. Stoke City's problem. Well, I think Stoke City, their issues date back to the Premier League. I think the season they got relegated was a symptom of poor policy in the transfer market. Some players they signed didn't pan out. I don't know if they've not. I don't think they fully adapted to the Championship. It's very hard to. It's a very hard league to get out of and get promotion from. As a Blackburn fan, I should know we actually got relegated down to League One and bounced back in a season. But the Championship is a cutthroat league, and they spent so long in the Premier League that they have to basically restyle their style of football, reshape how they play, bring players in, and offload players. I think you can't just look on the field. You have to look off the field, behind the scenes. I think that's something that you got to look at is behind the scenes. There's definitely not. It's not quite right. But I don't know how you. I don't know how you quantify the problem, but I always get asked the question about certain sports teams and why they've been not very successful for a long period of time. And I'm going to get on to the Islanders again in a minute. There was one live stream I think last week. An Edmonton Oilers fan was asking me some questions from Canada, and you got to look away from the sporting side of things where the team plays to the behind the scenes with the administration of the team, the building blocks they put in place, contracts, culture. Team culture is important one. Dressing room culture. There's a whole host of things. I can't put a finger on it. I don't really follow football as religiously as I used to. I will admit that I'm less of a fan of football now than what I was, let's say, 10 years ago. You could look back at the managerial appointment. You could look back at their transfer market dealings over the last 3-4 years, and some of the players they brought in, like Arnautovic, didn't really hit it off, and that's a lot of wages to pay for a player who didn't really hit it off. And then you could look at Sadio Berahino. No, was that the right guy to bring in, and how he was hopeless, and a lot of decisions on recruitment. But there's definitely things going on behind the scenes with that club that aren't all positive. Barry Trotz did good things for us, but we need more signings. Yeah, I think there's a possibility of some trades before the season starts. There's still a few RFAs that haven't. There's actually quite a few RFAs and UFAs that haven't been signed. So there's some free agents out there. You could offer sheet, let's say Patrick Laine, for example. That's the big rumour mill. We're going to, as a Jets fan, we're going to trade Patrick Laine to the Islanders for someone, trade his rights. I don't know. I think you're a solid team. Defense is far better. Goal scoring is where you need that spark. But as a team, it's a team effort with the Islanders. I think they're not as bad as people think they are. And Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello have really turned around a team that was a sieve last year. Defensively, the season before last, like 2 years ago. So last year when the season ended last year, if you get my drift. Defensively, absolutely all over the place. There didn't seem to be any kind of cohesion. That's changed last season. That changed. Barry Trotz, Stanley Cup winning coach. Lou Lamoriello, Stanley Cup winning GM. You've got the right management in there. There's still a few places, I think, and positions that need filling and a bit of depth. But as long as the prospect pool is developing well and the right moves are made with free agency or even with trade, then yeah, I think the team can definitely be improved, but the preseason hasn't even started yet, really, for the NHL. So there is still I think 4 weeks or a month where those little additions can be made. But the season is fast approaching, and that shouldn't be discounted with the season getting closer and closer. But there's still time to get training camp started, get the preseason games, the exhibition games out of the way, and look at some of the prospect pool and possibly promote some of the younger players from the AHL affiliate. I think you'll be surprised. I think Hosang is the wild card. Can Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello get the best out of a really high maintenance but highly talented player? That's I think that's where it could be interesting with Josh Hosang. The big debate about him is he got the right mentality. He's got the skill. It's just is it the mentality? Is it the work ethic? But I'm a Jets fan, so I'm a little bit more how should I put it, Jet centric. But yeah, I think the Islanders are definitely better than what they were when Trotz and Lamoriello came in. There's still a ways to go to make them a full on Stanley Cup contender and a competitor for the Stanley Cup. But I still think you can make the playoffs again, and whether you can get the second round or the conference final, baby steps, I think. But yeah, there's a month where trades and free agency, that there's still RFAs out there, there's still UFAs out there. The salary cap being lower than what was anticipated has put some teams under a lot more pressure than they anticipated. And as a Jets fan, I know what that feels like, because half our defense has gone. And where Dustin Bufflin, as the key defenseman, if he gets injured, we've had it. So as a fan of a team that's really under cap hell right now, that still hasn't signed its two best goal scorers to contract extensions, be it bridge contract or long-term extension, the salary cap has a big part to play. So yeah, expect some trades. There will be some trade action before the season starts. That'd be my viewpoint on it. But I think the Islanders have a bright future. They've got that new arena at Belmont being built, and they've got the right management team in place who won Stanley Cups between them. So I think the path is looking good. I think the direction the team is taking is the right one. It will be a slow process. It won't happen overnight. You're not going to go from one of the worst defenses I've ever seen in professional ice hockey in the modern era to Stanley Cup champions in 2 seasons. It doesn't happen. There's still pieces to add, but I think trades will happen. I think some free agent signings will happen, and we don't know what's going to happen in training camp. Someone's going down injured, like a high-profile key player, and they might have to promote one of the prospects to the starting lineup earlier than anticipated, and he may shine. You just don't know. So there's a lot still to happen, but it's the off season still for the NHL. Whereas in Europe here, we've already started pre-season and the Champions Hockey League and the Continental Hockey League, which are basically the European version of ice hockey's version of the Champions League in football, or what you would call soccer. We've already had competitive matches played in August and September, so the European season is already underway. My local team's pre-season starts a week today, and so therefore the European leagues will already be starting regular season games before the NHL has even got the first exhibition pre-season game done. So it's a different sporting culture, but the seasons are the same length. It's just we start a month earlier. But yeah, no, I understand, asking the questions on my thoughts on the Islanders. I think the organisation's been had some bad years, and part of that is to do with, again, off ice issues. So behind the scenes, some bad trades, bad contracts, some bad management decisions, bad ownership decisions. They seem to be turning a corner now. Let's hope that continues, because I like where the league is right now with parity. I do. I think it makes it more interesting. It makes it that any of the 31 teams from the first puck drop can win the Stanley Cup. of the initial first week of the season. The salary cap could have been higher, and we're still waiting to hear what happens with the collective bargaining agreement talks as well. That's going to be a big discussion. The NHL has decided to stay in. Well, the funny thing is, the Rangers have only won 2 more Stanley Cups than the Islanders, and the Rangers are an original 6 team. So read into that what you will. In reality, you can read into that what you will. But yeah, the Islanders have struggled with poor ownership decisions, poor management decisions, some really bizarre trades. The DiPietro contract is still haunting Islanders fans. And yeah, in recent years, the playoffs, their playoff history hasn't been great. Their playoff success has been limited. But it happens to every side. They go through periods of success and failure. I mean, you got to look at NHL history and look at the Detroit Red Wings in the 70s and the early 80s. They were a team that players refused to play for. Players refused to sign who were drafted. So, no, I don't want to play for this team. We could get to a stage where certain teams have that, where a player is drafted. Let's say Edmonton, who, as Jesse Puljujarvi, has gone back to Finland and is already scoring goals from Finland. He's hit off in Liga really well, and he's playing up the talent he is. We could get to a point where the Edmonton Oilers, for example, are a team where they draft a player at the draft table, and he goes, "No, I don't want to play there. Trade me." And this is something that, with bad management and bad culture, can happen. You can have some really talented players who are contracted who don't want to play for you, and that's something that, let me sort the chair out. There we go. And that's something that the Edmonton Oilers are starting to find out is they could have lost Jesse Puljujarvi. He could be lost to them, and whether he stays in Europe permanently or it's just for part of this season, the Oilers have mismanaged that situation. They could have traded him, and a team like the Islanders could have used a player like Jesse Puljujarvi, a young, talented forward who, given the right motivation and the right coaching, so Barry Trotz could definitely be the right coach for Jesse Puljujarvi, could have really had a smashing season last year. But the Oilers couldn't find a trade partner or didn't want to trade, and he's decided to sign in Finland for the year. There is a clause in his contract that means he can return to the NHL by December the 1st if there is a trade in play. But he's already playing competitive matches and he's already having an impact in the Finnish Liga. So, but yeah, I do think you are overlooked by the media in New York because the Rangers are the more historical team. They've won a Stanley Cup more recently. They've been deeper into the playoffs more recently, but I don't think the Rangers are as good a team as the media hypes up. I think the Rangers are in a rebuild phase, and whether they are ready for the playoffs or not this season is up for debate. A very good friend of mine is a New York Rangers fan over here in the UK, and because they haven't made the playoffs for a couple of years, I've been giving him a little bit of banter over that. But he even admits that the team have problems. Lundqvist has got 1 or 2 seasons left in him, and is Georgiev ready to be the starter full time? That's a question. The Oilers, though, as an organisation, again, much like the Islanders, very successful in the 80s, a lot of Stanley Cups, a lot of success. They have been to a Stanley Cup final, in recent times, about 10 or so years ago. But again, lack of success in the playoffs, lack of playoff appearances, and mismanaging young, talented players. Taylor Hall, had he been fit last year, I think the Devils would have made playoffs again. Massive impact in his first season at the Devils, and the Oilers struggled without him. Puljujarvi's another one. Yakupov, although Yakupov failed at a variety of teams, but you can see where I'm getting at here, where they've had a variety of first round draft picks, first, second, third, fourth, fifth in the draft, and they haven't developed them very well, and they haven't managed them very well, and they've gone on and they've asked for trades, or they've been traded, they've left the organisation as free agents or via trade. and they've gone on to other teams, apart from Yakupov, notwithstanding, and they've done really, really well. And that has to be a cause of concern for Oilers fans. Is they're mismanaging their prospects, they're mismanaging their roster, and it's an unbalanced roster. You've technically got three centres sometimes playing on the same line in Nugent Hopkins, Draisaitl, and McDavid. The LA Kings, I think, they've got 2 Stanley Cups in recent years. They've really fallen off a cliff. The Ottawa Senators have fallen off a cliff. The Senators is down to bad ownership. The LA Kings is down to getting old, really. Same with the Anaheim Ducks. They got old. The Kings, it's an interesting one with the Kings. They've got the 2 Stanley Cups and they've got that playoff experience, but the team as a whole, a lot of injuries hurt them last year, and some really bizarre contracts. Kovalchuk, for example, that's a really bizarre contract. The way he left the league when he was at the Devils to come back to the Kings, his age, really bizarre. But for periods last season, in some games, he was their best player. I think the Kings are in a rebuild. Absolutely. It's going to take time with the Kings, I think. I think they've got a lot of players on their roster who are on lengthy contracts. And if you buy them out, that's going to harm them under the cap with the cap situation. But I think the Kings, even with their 2 Stanley Cups, are very wildly inconsistent, absolutely. But you've got to look at where the US media is based. The US media is based in LA and New York. This is why the Rangers get overhyped. This is why the Kings get overhyped. That's where the US media is mainly based out of, the national media. Chicago to a certain extent, but New York and LA are the 2 biggest cities in the US, and that is where a lot of the media outlets have offices and journalists, and so that explains why they're overhyped. I think that it's going to be hard to predict who finishes where this season. I think, as I say, the parity that the league has now, it makes it a much more competitive league than what it was. But the Kings and the Ducks, I think, can miss the playoffs. Best Canadian team this season? That's a very good question. Very, very good question, actually. Toronto seemed to get to the playoffs the first round and then get no further. The Canadians could be on the verge of playoffs. They could be on the edge of the playoff picture. The Jets, we've lost our entire defense corps for some reason because we're in cap hell. The salary cap being lower, and as a smaller market team with a smaller budget, that's going to be difficult. Calgary and Edmonton, obviously, the Battle of Alberta finally meant something. Calgary are dominating that rivalry right now. Vancouver, I don't know. All 7 Canadian teams could miss the playoffs this year. All 7 could make the playoffs this year. It is that bizarre. I think the Pacific Division is the weakest, and of course, you've got Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver in the Pacific. Winnipeg in the Central. All 7 Canadian teams could miss. All 7 Canadian teams could get in. I think the Senators won't get into the playoffs. I think the Senators are going to be one of the bottom teams in the league. But 6 out of the 7 Canadian teams could make the playoffs. Realistically, it could be none of them. It's generally, I think, a very difficult one to say who is going to be the best Canadian team this season. The Jets could astound the critics and actually respond to the second half of last season. They could respond and respond well. I don't know. I think Toronto look like the most consistent of the Canadian teams. I think the Montreal Canadiens, a couple of seasons out of the playoffs, Carey Price has got to stay fit. That is a must. That's a big, big must, is Carey Price's fitness. He's becoming injury prone, and that's like another massive concern. The Senators, it's not the players' fault. It's the management. It's the ownership. That the Ubergate last year, I think all but one of those players has now left the organization. Pierre Dorian as GM has made some bizarre trades, trading away draft picks and trading away, key players. The Eric Carlson situation, the Ryan Hoffman situation, Duchesne hasn't stuck around. Ottawa are in a real mess of their own making, and it's down to Eugene Melnick, the owner, who is not a very popular owner. The Aquilinis in Vancouver are bad, but Eugene Melnick is possibly the most hated owner in the NHL right now. The fan base is restless. The team is what it is really. It's full of inexperienced youngsters and journeyman veteran players. Goaltending could be an issue. Anderson's 1 year older. He's had some injuries. He's obviously had some personal issues with his wife's illness. So there's that to consider. Montreal, they've made some good changes. They make some good additions. Carey Price, if he can stay fit for the whole season, yes, they have a chance to be not only the best Canadian team, but do well in the playoffs. But goal scoring is their issue, getting enough goals. They haven't got that out-and-out goal scorer who can score 50 goals. They just haven't got that. So that's scoring by committee with the first 2-3 lines. And is Max Domi really their best forward? That's a question. Toronto, they've got a lot of stars on that team, but Mitch Marner, will he sign? We saw what happened last year with the what's his name? That's going to annoy me now. I've forgot the player's name now, but they're in cap hell. They're trying to keep a roster together. Matthews and Marner debate. He's the better of the two. Tavares is taking up a lot of money. Nylander, that's the one. Nylander holding out. That's sort of set a precedent for an RFA. And there's still some issues defensively with Toronto. I think Anderson gets a lot of flack unnecessarily, but they haven't got out the first round. They've been regularly getting to the playoffs, and that's it. And they don't take that next step in the first round to the second round. They seem to get stuck. So Toronto have been consistent, but they've been just that. They haven't taken the next step. Toronto will support anything. They've supported failure for most of the last half century, really. The Raptors, until recently, were appalling as a basketball team. The Blue Jays had a couple of decent seasons in there, but have been appalling for years. The Marlies and Maple Leafs are starting to become successful again, and they're starting to be one of the better teams. But the Marlies in the AHL and the NHL, Maple Leafs are starting to finally do stuff, but again, they're not taking the next step. Toronto FC and the MLS have I think, won a couple of MLS titles, but for the most part are just average. The Toronto Arrows in Major League Rugby have had their first season and actually played quite well, and were a good team to watch, but tipped to win the competition, didn't. So Toronto, you could put any team in there and it could suck ass, and they will still support it. They will. I don't know who the best team in Canada is going to be. I think it could be between Winnipeg, Toronto, and Calgary again. They're the three teams that have been leading the Canadian side of the NHL for a couple of seasons now. They seem to be the best run teams as well. They seem to be the best run teams with the rosters they have and the way they're running their teams. They make profit. Montreal, I think they need another goaltender who is capable of not just backing up Carey Price, but replacing him long term, because Carey Price is regularly getting injuries now, and they haven't got enough. They haven't got that out and out goal scorer at the moment. Vancouver, oh god, the Aquilinis aren't very popular owners either. They've made some interesting additions to the team in the off season. Some interesting trades. It's going to be interesting, but I think that the top, all the 7 Canadian teams could miss, or they could all get in. That's how much parity is in the league. I think the Senators are going to be possibly one of the bottom teams in the NHL overall. Vancouver could be are in the Pacific Division, which is a weak division as it stands at the moment. Have a better chance than of making the playoffs now than they've had since 2015. So while they haven't got the strongest team at the moment, and they're sort of still rebuilding, and they're making some bizarre contract decisions and trades, they have a chance to to be a wild card. I think the Jets that they need to look at making a trade or two in that defense core, or you know, I think there's a few concerns about depth, but I think got enough to make the playoffs at least. I think they'll be angry with how they finished the second half of last season and the playoff defeat to St. Louis. In a winning position in game one, 1-0 up, conceding 2 goals in the last 8 minutes. I think really I was watching that game. I was not a happy bunny. Let's just say that. Let's just say I wasn't a happy Jets fan, but I think they're going to be angry as a team that they let themselves down. I think they are a well-run franchise, however. But I don't know. Out of all the teams in the NHL, I think the team that disappointed me the most were the Tampa Bay Lightning. Strange how it may sound, the Tampa Bay Lightning were the team that disappointed me the most last season. 2 years ago, they were running away with the President's Trophy race, and then Nashville and Winnipeg overtook them because they let their foot off the pedal, and it happened again in the playoffs. They ran away with the President's Trophy, and they weren't playing a meaningful game for 2 months. And when it came to the playoffs, they just couldn't get going. They had no intensity, no drive, no aggression, and they were swept. So it's an interesting one. I think they're the team that disappointed me the most. It's going to be really interesting to see how they start this season. If they start this season badly, questions will be asked of John Cooper, and questions will be asked of Yzerman's successor, because Yzerman's moved on back to Detroit as general manager, but Yzerman's put that team together. So questions will be asked of Tampa Bay if they have a slow start to the season. But generally speaking, the last few years, they've been one of the most consistent teams in the league. They've just failed in the playoffs. But I think it's too early to say this team's going to be a playoff winner. This team's going to win the Stanley Cup. This team's going to get to a final. This team's going to get out the first round. But the first couple months of the season will tell us a lot about what direction teams are taking. Calgary do look good, but again, out in the first round of the playoffs. Plus, they play in the Pacific Division, which is the weakest division at the moment. It's considered the weakest division. I actually think it is the weakest division. But we'll see what happens. I mean, we've got 4 or 5 weeks of the season starts. I think the NHL playlist isn't the best. A lot of it's from last year's 2018 playoffs. I could do some more NHL videos, I suppose. I could do a lot more NHL videos, really. But I've got some hockey videos planned. There's an ice hockey playlist as well, where I follow the local British ice hockey. So I've got 2 I've got the NHL playlist, I've got the ice hockey playlist. But some of those videos are really old, and you can definitely see the early videos to now that the quality has improved massively. I really hate my early stuff because it's so scrappy. In my view, it's really scrappy stuff. But yeah, I mean, people are subscribing for a reason to the channel. And you're the first Islanders fan to come on the channel and comment and discuss things. And I do think, yeah, there's a lot that's going to happen in the next month. I think there are going to be some trades. We'll have to see how the collective bargaining agreement opt out if the NHLPA decides to opt out. The NHL has decided not to opt out, so they're staying in. They want to continue with what's in place. So that will be interesting if the NHLPA opt out of the current collective bargaining agreement. We'll find out in a couple of weeks. And that could tell us if we're going to have any kind of lockout player strike, or if they are going to go into discussions in good faith. I think this is the most important period of time for the NHL, with Vegas having recently joined, Seattle joining soon, lots of new fans, the growth of the game globally as a sport. I think now is the time for the NHLPA to come to some kind of agreement and negotiate in good faith. I think the NHLPA has got more members now because there's more teams than the last lockout, and the NHL is making more money than they ever have, and so are the players. So both sides have a lot more to lose now than what they did in 2004, 2005 when we lost that whole season, and before. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the collective bargaining agreement. I think escrow will be the main talking point. I think Olympic participation will be on there. and there'll be a few other bits and pieces that have, you know, been an issue for some time up for discussion. But we'll have to wait and see what happens when the NHLPA has the option to opt out of the CBA, and when that does happen, and we get past that date, and they haven't, and we know that they've decided to either extend it or have it an ongoing like rolling collective bargaining agreement. The fact that the NHLPA and the NHL have to have these collective bargaining agreements. In fact, every North American professional sport seems to have these collective bargaining agreements. Shows the issues that are there in professional sport. But there we go. Right. So, any other questions? Because I've been waffling on now for an hour and 15 minutes. We've had some really interesting talking points. But I'm open to some more questions. I mean, I'm just going to quickly check, see what the London Broncos do against the Leeds Rhinos, because this is a must-win game for both sides in the Super League, because it could tell who's getting promoted and who's getting relegated. Well, who's getting relegated from the Super League and who stays in the Super League, should I say? Home BBC Sport. Absolutely, you could tell your friend about the channel. Absolutely, that would be quite interesting. I haven't done a lot on Vancouver, but I could look into the Aquilini's ownership. I've done a video on the Sedines. I've just looking up some sports results quickly. But yeah, absolutely, you could send your friend to my way. I think it's important that the channel keeps growing. I think it's important that we keep having these discussions because where is it? Update Super League table. That's what I want. There's so much to discuss in a variety of areas. I think the Aquilini's ownership of the Vancouver Canucks has been up and down. There's definitely restlessness in that fan base. Absolutely, there's restlessness. There's a restless nature within the Vancouver fan base. They have made some interesting decisions going forward. And Vancouver's an interesting city for sport because the NBA's been there and it failed, whereas the MLS and the NHL are sticking it out and have proven that you can, in a Canadian market outside of Toronto, have sport. And people go, "Oh, it's only the MLS," but it proves that you can have a major league in a Canadian market that isn't Toronto, and you can have more than one sport in there. But the NBA have been to Vancouver and it didn't work out. So that's an interesting topic that I should have really looked at earlier in the summer. But any more questions from anyone? Because it is an interesting city. Absolutely, it's a very interesting city. They've had the Winter Olympics in 2010, and I think that is. I remember that Olympics very, very well. I watched the ice hockey men's final live on the TV with my family at silly o'clock in the morning here in the UK. I mean, it was very, very late on a Sunday, early hours of a Monday, and I had to go. I think I don't know if 2010. What was I doing in 2010? I had to be up early in the morning for something. But I remember watching the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. Very interesting city for sport. The NBA failing in Vancouver is a big sticking point for a lot of sports fans in the city. With the success that the Raptors have had this summer in the NBA, and basketball in Canada and the growth of the game in Canada is a big talking point right now. Big talking point. With a variety of things. Why did it fail in Vancouver, which is possibly the safest market outside of Toronto they could have put an NBA franchise? Because while I do say the MLS is the weaker of the major leagues, Vancouver proves you can have a multi-sport city in Canada. More than just a CFL team with an NHL franchise. You can have a multi-sport city in Canada. But I think a part of it was economically, but you got to look at how the NBA franchise was run, and it's a video that I could do some looking into, and I could definitely do some research into. It's definitely something that absolutely deserves attention. As why does Canada only have the Blue Jays in baseball? Because obviously the Montreal Expos are now in Washington, and why there's only one NBA team in Toronto as well. It is a question that needs to be looked at. Is why um, in the major sports leagues and the professional sports leagues in the US and Canada is the NHL um, doing really well in Canada? Well, it's the national sport, it's ice hockey, but why is the MLS doing better than the NBA? Why is the MLS doing better than Major League Baseball? And this is a question that needs to be looked at. Is why is a different sport doing really well in Canada, which has a smaller fan base in the US and smaller revenues, but seems to work, whereas things like the NFL, no Canadian presence of the NFL north of the border. CFL tried going south of the border, it didn't work. Maybe that put the NFL off. There are some interesting questions. I think some of it's economics. Canada does have a smaller population, smaller revenues, different currency, a whole host of I think economic considerations there. Absolutely, but um, it is interesting to look at why it failed in Vancouver. I think sports fans in Vancouver are trying to work out why it failed. But the NBA clearly has had its feet burnt there and doesn't want to go back and fail again. But it's going to be interesting to see how the Raptors do this season. If they can get back to the playoffs and be a consistent playoff performer, if they can win the NBA title a couple more times, would be interesting. Because then the NBA has to seriously look at the wider Canadian sports market and go, can we actually expand the NBA in Canada? Can we look at teams that are struggling in, let's say, the Memphis Grizzlies, for example? Terrible team, terrible attendances. Should we move them? There is that kind of debate. But I don't know if you also got to look, is the available arenas there? Because the Saddle Dome does need rebuilding or refurbing, or a new arena built in Calgary. The Saddle Dome is old, very old. So that is a question mark. Is not only there enough fans in a location in the market, is there a building suitable? That's another question. And in my mind, there's about, I would say, 9 arenas that are suitable in Canada, but only, I would say, as I say, 6 or 7 cities suitable in Canada, and I think maybe even less than that, maybe 3 or 4. It's a difficult question, but at the same time, I can definitely look into why it failed in Vancouver. But I'm not an NBA fan, so for me, while I will happily look at research, I've done videos on the NBA. I've broken something here. Oh god, something's fallen off. Oh, my chest of drawers is broken. Let me just fix my chest of drawers. Oh, what have I done? I've broken something. That's better. While I'm not a massive fan of basketball, sorry about that. While I'm not a massive fan of basketball as a sport, I understand why people follow it. I understand why people support it. I understand why people are fans of the NBA and the product. But it's going to be, I'll have to look into why it failed in Vancouver and do some research. It's going to take me a while. I'm going to have to get the whiteboard out. So if you've seen any of my videos with the whiteboard out, that's going to have to come out, and I'll have to put my headset back on and put the microphone away. So there's a fair bit of research that I'm going to have to do on why the NBA failed in Vancouver and why Major League Baseball outside of Toronto is not a thing. And these are questions that you have to ask: is why certain sports don't really have that reach or that impact or that fan base. And I think the Raptors, we'll see how many of these so-called new fans stick around and support the Raptors long term, and stick with that organization and say, look, we're going to keep supporting this team, and how long they stick around. That's going to be an interesting question. But Canada is a hockey country. CFL is the second sport, and there you go. Oh yes, the Brooklyn Nets. I'm not a massive, as I said, I'm not religiously following the NBA. I haven't followed the NBA really ever. Really, I can watch I can watch basketball casually. I can sit through a game and watch a game, no problem. Um, I can name a few of the players, no problem. Some of them are household names, even over here in the UK. The thing is, for me, basketball isn't a type of sport that I like. I'm like more my contact sports, like my ice hockey, my rugby league, my rugby union, um, my AFL. So if you understand what AFL is, Aussie rules football, um, they're the type of sport that I watch more. But at the same time, I get why people watch basketball. The NBA is a very profitable league, very profitable. All the teams are worth a lot of money. So there's a lot of money in the NBA. Some of the players are the best paid athletes in the world. Are there issues with the NBA? Absolutely. I've looked into the NBA betting scandal, which involved a high profile referee. Um, I've done videos on that. I've looked at the history of the NBA. And the NBA exists because of the NHL owners wanting to fill their arenas when the ice hockey season wasn't being played. That's how the NBA actually really came about, ironically. But no, absolutely, there are. The NBA also is now taking games over here to the UK and around the world. Um, these overseas matches, you wouldn't get a European team playing matches overseas in regular season. The sporting cultures are different, and there's been a big backlash from European sports fans when European leagues have gone out and said we want to take sport over to the US in regular season, and fans have said no. Players have gone no. Players' unions have gone no. Um, Governing bodies have gone. Why is the league doing this? It's because it's a different sport and culture over here in Europe. I get why the NFL, the NBA, the NHL are taking games to Europe. Major League Baseball, obviously, taking games to London this summer to mixed success. I think they could have marketed it better. They could have had a better TV package, which was more accessible to people. Major League Baseball has problems. I think all the four big major leagues in the US and Canada have problems. They're all different issues, but they are issues nonetheless. But we'll see. But no, as you said, you've got a friend who's a fan of the Vancouver Canucks. Absolutely, send them my way. I've got some NHL videos planned because obviously the season is fast approaching, and I want to get some videos up there about predictions for the Stanley Cup and teams who's going to do what. It's going to be an interesting season. But yeah. Oh dear, Jacksonville. Yeah, there's a big debate about Jacksonville, the Jaguars, and if they're going to come over here and be Florida's an interesting state when it comes to sport. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one Super Bowl win, owned by the Glazer family, who are Manchester United here in England, who play in the English Premier League. The Jacksonville Jaguars play a lot of games in London with the NFL London Series. Their owner, Saheed Khan, owns Fulham Football Club in what is now the Championship. They were a Premier League football club. They got relegated. Jacksonville, not a very successful sporting area of Florida. The debate about the Jacksonville Jaguars is a big one. Saheed Khan wanted to buy Wembley, which is our national stadium, and there were rumours that he wanted to move the Jaguars to London. I've looked at the NFL possibly having a London-based team. Those plans have been on the table for 20 years. They are not going to happen. I'm not sure how sustainable a team in the UK would be, considering some of the economic and political things that are currently happening with the UK. That's a big risk, big risk. While the NFL London Series has been a great success, really positive success, I'm not sure with the ticket pricing and the fact that all 32 teams are supported in the UK. It's not just everyone's a Jacksonville fan. Every team has a following. And Jacksonville have been a terrible team for such a long time. They've really not been a good team for a very, very long time. And it's only 8 home games a season before postseason. I just don't know how successful that would be. And a year or so ago, the Boston Celtics CEO was asked, the Fenway Sports Group, I think, who also own Liverpool. He was asked the question of what's the likelihood of a North American sporting franchise being moved here to London or to Europe, and he said 10 years ago it was a possibility. Now, not a reality at all. The global economy has changed in the last decade. So the Jacksonville question with the Jaguars, while 10, 15 years ago, even the build up to the London series, so before the London series even had started, the NFL were looking at taking a team to London. They had contingency plans in place. And then a big stock market crash happened in 2008, and the situation has significantly changed. While it has made the NFL a lot of money and gained them a lot of exposure, and the NFL is really well supported here in the UK, I don't know. There's been a big debate over should the NFL move to a team to the UK? Will it be Jacksonville? Will the other 31 teams be happy with that? Will the NFLPA be happy with that? Would the league sanction it? All these kind of things. Jacksonville as a city, yeah, it does struggle in Florida as a sporting city, and Florida is ironically a really a state of the US filled with sporting history. Absolutely. You've got the Miami Dolphins. You've got the Tampa Bay Lightning, who won a Stanley Cup. You've got the Florida Panthers, who've been to a Stanley Cup final. You have successful teams down there in Florida, but that's in the past, a lot of it. The Tampa Bay Lightning at the moment, I think, is the most successful team based out of Florida right now for what it's doing regular season and regularly getting to the postseason. But next year, you've got David Beckham's Miami MLS team starting its inaugural season. So sport in Florida is still growing. It's an interesting state for sport. And Jacksonville is one of those cities that does struggle. The Jaguars are a terrible team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers aren't much better, even though they've got a Super Bowl to their name. They're not much better. Miami Dolphins aren't the team that they were. So I think there's a lot resting on Tampa Bay Lightning this coming season. And we'll have to wait and see how David Beckham's MLS franchise does in its inaugural season next year as well. It might be, yeah. I think the Florida Panthers playing in Sunrise, which is on the edge of the Miami metropolitan area, is the wrong location. I think they should definitely look at moving arenas, but they've signed a long-term arena deal where they are in Sunrise at the BB&T Center, and that harms their attendance, absolutely. But their lack of playoff success also harms their attendance. But the Florida Panthers, I think, are going to have a very, very good season this year. They've made the right moves with coaching and trades and players. I think they've got the right pieces in place down in Florida to take that next step. Getting Joel Quenneville in as coach was an inspired piece of business, absolutely. But Florida as a state is one of the most successful sporting states in the US, historically, in the last 50 years. Just some of the teams there really, really, really suck. But Florida as a state, as a sporting state, does have some historically successful teams. At the moment, they're not doing as well as they were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but it doesn't mean that they can't gain momentum and get better. But there are some teams down there that are generally appalling. There is no hiding from that fact. There are some really bad teams down in Florida right now. But it's a state with a lot of championship winning history. So it's an interesting one. But Jacksonville, the Jaguars are shocking. And if they do move to London eventually, and the team is a sucker and is losing all the time, you can't expect British fans to be paying more than what US fans would pay to go to a game, because the tickets in London for the Wembley series and what we've seen with when Twickenham hosted games, now White Hart Lane and things like that, they're not going to be willing to pay that much money for a loser. So it'll be interesting to see if the NFL does seriously keep considering moving and having a London franchise. Yes, the British teams are doing well in the hockey Champions Hockey League. Yes, it's sort of like it's sort of the Champions Hockey League is sort of like the group stages is basically part of the pre-season for some of these European teams, because the regular seasons haven't actually started. Domestic leagues haven't started yet, so the group stages are sort of like that intense pre-season that you want to have. But I was very impressed with Belfast last night. Unfortunately, that they lost, and there was that controversial goal disallowed last night as well, which should it have been given? You can debate yes or no on that. But it was a very controversial goal disallowed, high stick. Angle wasn't fully conclusive. It was a bit of 50-50, but the on ice call was a good goal. So we have to see clarification from the officials about why the on ice call was deemed secondary to the replay. If it wasn't conclusive, you have to go with the on ice call. That's my belief on the rules and what I understand the rules to be for interpretation. But they gave it as a no goal, and then game goes to overtime, and Augsburg win. But no, I've been really impressed with Cardiff and Belfast. I think the growth of the Elite League and now this new National League with new teams and more players developing who are local players is a good thing. Fort Myers. You got bearing in mind when it comes to the US professional sports, it's the size of the sports market. It's how many people in the local area, disposable income, TV coverage, local media deals. It's market area. Is it a small market, medium sized, or big market city? That kind of thing. Whereas in Europe, it's just the local team in the local area playing in the league it's playing in with promotion relegation. You don't have that in the US. It's a franchise system. Is there enough corporate money in the area in Fort Myers? A whole host of questions like that. But yeah, there are some underrated sports teams out there. There's some undervalued sports markets and sport teams out there, and areas that have produced some great athletes and great teams over the years. But the US way of looking at things is, what size is the market share going to be? How much money can this market make the league and the owner? Whereas in Europe, we have our local sports teams will play in the league pyramid, so to speak. There's promotion, relegation. Clubs are clubs, not franchises. So they're more community based. They don't relocate out of a town. They may build a new stadium in the town area and just move stadiums, but they won't relocate to a different location, so to speak, in that sense. Whereas in the US and Canada, the team sucks, relocate it to a different state, different province, different city. Whereas here in Europe, they'll just build a new stadium 2 miles down the road in the same town and move stadium and do things like that. But yeah, you could definitely have a minor league, minor league sports team there, absolutely. But the US franchise system is, I wouldn't say bizarre, but it's different. It's a different cultural thing. It's clearly a sporting cultural thing that's taken many decades to develop. Whereas over here in Europe, we have local clubs based in the local area that local people support. So the fan base is pretty loyal and fanatic. But it's an interesting one. I don't know enough about the area. I don't know enough about Florida in a sense of how big places like Fort Myers and Jacksonville are population wise. But if an area like that is producing good quality athletes who play multiple sports or participate in multiple sports, it says to me that it's got the right youth programs in place, the right sport development programs in place, and that you could in theory have a professional professional team there. Absolutely. But you've got to look at a whole variety of factors when it comes to US and Canada, which is different to Europe. You have the franchise-based system, we have the club-based system, we have promotion relegation, we have like a tier system where your tier system is the major league and then the minor affiliate leagues. It's sort of that's the differences between um, sporting cultures, I think. And it's an interesting one. Very, very interesting question and an interesting topic. But we will have to see, if someone wants to put a team in and whether a sports league will say, yep, you can have a team there. We'll accept your bid for an expansion relocation team. By all means, uh, you know, put a team there. But it's again, how much money can it make the league? That's interesting. Beginning of the live stream, I was talking about Pochettino and the speculation over his future this week in the media, and whether that's just the media ramping up the speculation, or there generally is concern that he might leave the club. Tottenham have to win silverware this season. I think it's a must for them now. They've come so close for the last 3-4 years, and they haven't quite achieved it. They have to win silverware this season. Yes, there is bad weather due for the southeast of the US. Hurricane is due to hit in the next, I think, day or so. Um, that is another thing that gets overlooked is things like the weather, how they affect sports in that part of the US. Is the hurricanes? Um, you know. That's something that does get overlooked, and you notice that the teams in those hurricane affected areas are generally less successful than the teams not in those hurricane affected areas. It is unfortunate, but it's a natural thing, and it's something that we can't avoid. And we can debate the US president's way of dealing with the hurricane, which is to nuke the bloody thing. But look, it's something that obviously we hope everyone gets through it safely, and no one is, loss of life is minimal, but in these big storm events, that's something that isn't always possible. And hopefully, yeah, I've got friends in the US and Canada, so every time there's like a hurricane or a storm warning, I make sure they're okay. I've got friends in Texas, I've got friends Pacific Northwest. So anytime there's like a storm warning or earthquakes or hurricanes, I get on the old social medias and make sure everyone's okay. And yeah, and it is what it is. I mean, the eastern seaboard does get hammered with these tropical storms and hurricanes, and it is unfortunate. It does affect obviously infrastructure, and with that infrastructure, there's things called sporting infrastructure, and it's also great to see when sports teams come out and show their solidarity with the communities that are affected and are part of the relief efforts as well. I think that's something that gets overlooked as well. At times is sports teams, let's say the Carolina Hurricanes and the Florida Panthers, and these sports teams, when an event like this does actually happen, come out and be part of the relief effort. Will Arsenal come back and win? It's a North London derby, and Spurs seem to have the upper hand in recent seasons. That wasn't always the case. Arsenal dominated this fixture for a long, long time, but it will show a lot about the character of the Arsenal side if they can get back and get a 2-2 draw. That show a lot of character. But that what I've noticed with Arsenal is they seem to struggle in some of these high pressure situations in recent seasons. It doesn't matter if Unai Emery is obviously having to rebuild this side and retune this side a little bit from the Wenger era. But I noticed I haven't been watching it, but I've been following bits and pieces on the old Twitter feed throughout the day with various various sporting fixtures. I think with Arsenal, they sometimes crack in these high pressure games, and they've been a declining force as a team for a while now. Tottenham, however, while they are being dominant in this fixture between Arsenal and Tottenham, and they are seem to be the team that's on top right now, they're not winning trophies either. So there seems to be Arsenal are a team that are on the decline, even though they've won a few FA Cups in recent years. Tottenham are a team that's on the up, but they seem to have possibly stalled. And while this is a one-off game, it will show a lot of character from Arsenal if they can get back and get it to a 2-2. And if Spurs can make it a 3-1, it also shows their character and their intent. But I still think these two sides are well off the pace of Liverpool and Man City, well off the pace. And the speculation of Pochettino's future is not going away. And that's been ongoing now for a while. Is he staying at Tottenham long term? The fact he hasn't won a trophy is a big telling point there. On that front is the lack of trophies that Tottenham have had under Pochettino, which is zero. They've had no trophies. Even towards the end of Wenger's time in charge of Arsenal, he managed to bring them 3 more FA Cups. So that's an interesting one. Do I think Berry will take the EFL to court? Well, the ex-players via the PFA have come out and said that they're considering legal action. They're threatening to take the EFL to court. Ex-employees at Bury are threatening to take the EFL to court because it seems that the Football League, I wouldn't say manufactured the crisis, but allowed the situation to get a lot worse than it should have. They were fully aware of CNN, I think that's Sporting Analytics bid 10 weeks ago, 11 weeks ago now in this case. So they knew that there was a bid on the table. They also knew at 5 p.m. at deadline, there were 3 other bids on the table to buy the football club. So yes, I think there is a chance of legal action against the EFL. Plus, the Minister for Sport has got involved. The local MP for Bury, also the local member of Parliament's got involved. So it's now got political to a certain extent. And yeah, this story's far from over. We'll have to see if the ex-club employees and ex-players, if they can get to the court stage, because legal action can start with just discussing through solicitors, and there could be an out-of-court settlement. We just don't know. But I think there is a high possibility that there could be legal action. Yes. Do I think Emery will win Arsenal the league? I think he's more likely to win Arsenal a cup competition than the Premier League. I think he's more likely to win like the League Cup or the FA Cup for Arsenal. He might do something in the Europa League as well. Last season's final was a bit of a disaster for them, but Emery is a very good cup manager. He can get in a one-off game a team to win a knockout game. League form, I don't know. I don't think they've got enough to win the league, but they could be a dangerous cup team this season. I think that's where they're possibly going to get their silverware under Emery, will be in the cup competitions, which is better than nothing. I will say this. Getting silverware of any kind, and people mock the League Cup as a nothing trophy, but getting some kind of silverware can help a team build some confidence and take that next step. And this is, I think, where Tottenham in these big pressure games fall flat a little bit as well, and make mistakes and make errors and don't take that next step, is they haven't won that silverware yet. Even if it's just the League Cup, it's something to build upon. To think, all right, we've got the League Cup, let's go for the FA Cup. Right, we've got that, let's go for the Premier League. Right, we've got that, let's go for a European trophy. And then you can build. But until you get that first piece of silverware as a group of players, you're never going to know, are you? You're never going to know. So it's an interesting one. But I don't think at the moment Arsenal have enough to win the league. But time will tell on that one. I honestly believe time will tell, but I don't think they've got quite enough just yet to be league contenders. Harsh that may sound, I just don't think they've got enough. And I think Tottenham are missing something as well. And I think part of that is on the mental side of things. I think Tottenham are missing that one or two players who've got that winning mentality, who've won that silverware in that dressing room. I think that's something that Tottenham are missing. Arsenal are just generally, I would say Arsenal are missing a couple of defenders, a better quality goalkeeper, and I think one centre forward of quality away from winning the league. So I think while the league is still in its infancy, we've only played a couple of weeks, and there's a long way to go. Long way to go. They're still not where they need to be at our level yet. They're a little bit off where they need to be on that level. So, but we'll see what happens. There's a long season ahead, and we've already had so much happen in a short spell this season with so much going on, especially in the lower leagues. That it's going to be one of those seasons that's really interesting going forward. But at this time it's too early. Um, but we'll see what happens. There's still time left in the game for them to get an equaliser. There's still time for Tottenham to get that third. It is a North London derby. They're fiery affairs. For most of the last 30 years, Arsenal have been the top side in that derby, but now Tottenham have got the upper hand again. So it's one of them. It's the pendulum has swung in Tottenham's favour in recent years. That doesn't mean it will always stay there. And even in recent years, even though Arsenal haven't won the league for 12, 13 years, they've still won FA Cups recently. They've won silverware more recently than Tottenham, and that goes a long way with building confidence within a dressing room, within a squad. I've got this winners medal. I've got a winners medal, and that builds confidence in a player's mindset. But yeah, interesting question though. Yeah, any more questions to come? Because I'm going to wind this live stream down if there's no more questions to come up. Some interesting questions, some interesting discussion points. Talking about some sports that don't normally get talked about a lot at this time of the year because of the time of year that it is. But it's the 1st of September, and that's something that's stunned me. As we're forward a bit months, just over just under 5 months away from Christmas. So it's going to come around quick, and then we'll have the debate about are there too many games over the festive period in English football, and that's going to be a debate again. But it's is what it is. Any more questions before I decide to end the stream? Any more questions? Because there are some interesting talking points that we've discussed today, and I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow and throughout next week there are some really interesting talking points. Back to the Bury side of things, do I think Bury will take the EFL to court? It's very likely, absolutely. The players have come out and said they are considering legal action, and they plan to take legal action. That's the playing squad of past and present players who are still waiting to get paid. And on the club side of things, several people are threatening to take the EFL to court, and the EFL was under a lot of pressure to they've said they're going to have an investigation into why it happened, but the EFL have been under a lot of pressure for a while now, not just to do with Bury or Bolton, but a whole host of clubs and various rules they have in place, the fit and proper persons test, financial fair play. There's talk of a salary cap, as I said earlier in the live stream, bringing a salary cap in to control costs. But I think if you're going to bring it in for the Football League, you've got to bring it in for the Premier League as well. Otherwise, it's pointless having a financial cap in place if it's not going to be enforced across all leagues. Hello, Rama Saihan from Indonesia. What questions do you have? Indonesia is not a place that I've had many viewers from over the last couple of years, so I'll be interested to see what you've got to ask. If you've got any questions, whack them in the comment section quickly, and I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Indonesia is an interesting country. I know that much. I know there's some players who play in Holland football-wise who have got Indonesian descent. How's it going? It's going all right. Just wondering how long I should keep the live stream going for. It depends what questions come up. I'm interested to see what people have got to ask. We've had some really interesting discussions about certain things in the live stream. Do I watch AFL? I do occasionally watch the AFL. I catch the occasional game. I'm more of an NRL fan, but the AFL, yes, is good fun to watch. I played a little bit of it at school, so Uh, I'm not a massive fan. I have done videos on the AFL. I do watch the occasional game. I haven't caught much of this season, if I'm honest. I would have liked to have caught a few more games. I've missed too much of the season now to start watching. I think I'll have to try and catch a few of the finals games. I think, but there's definitely AFL videos that I can do. I've been asked a few questions to do some more. Um, Definitely, I've done a video on the Eston peptide scandal in the past, and I think uh, I can definitely revisit that and look into the history of the Essendon scandal and the impact it had on Australian sport. Um, am I a fan of international rugby league? I've been asked this before. I like rugby league in general. I prefer the NRL. International rugby league has a different set of rules. You are still allowed to fight in international rugby league. Uh, but I I do like watching it, but at the same time, it could be run better with the international side of the game. There could definitely be organised better but rugby league's rugby league to me. But I'm looking forward to the Great Britain Lions tour to New Zealand, Tonga, and Papua New Guinea. I'm looking forward to that this coming autumn. That's something that I am looking forward to, and there are games that will be put on live TV in the morning. So the timings are right for a morning kickoff for us UK time on a weekend. So it looks like I'll be able to watch all the tests for the Great Britain Lions team this autumn, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to that. Did I watch the 1895 Cup? No, I didn't. I actually had to go out and do other things. I think it should have taken place either the day before or earlier in the day. The attendance, there weren't many fans left at the end, and the attendance at Wembley for the Challenge Cup was poor anyway, which is a concern. We've gone from filling Wembley to uh, with about 80,000 to having like 60,000. And last year's Challenge Cup final was the lowest attendance since the war. This was the second lowest attendance since the war. So the RFL need to look at themselves in the mirror and go, are we getting this right with using Wembley as a venue for the Challenge Cup final and also having the Challenge Cup final on a bank holiday weekend in August? They could have easily had it a week earlier or this weekend, and it wouldn't have been a problem. They decided to put it on last weekend when King's Cross was closed for engineering works. There was engineering works going into Waterloo and Paddington. It's a bank holiday, so there's reduced service anyway. Really head scratcher. Will the Pencak Silat? It's a sport in Indonesia. Okay, didn't know that. I can definitely look into obscure niche sports that don't get a lot of attention or people don't know exist. Absolutely, I can look into that. I believe the internationals will be on the BBC. ITV have the Rugby Union World Cup. BBC has the Rugby League International TV rights for the World Cup. So I think it's on BBC. Because they got the Challenge Cup rights. So I think that's where that's going to be. And I think it is going to be a really challenging tour for the Lions. In the 2021 World Cup, there are some games, I think, at Wembley. I think there's some games. I think there's some games at the Ricoh Arena in Coventry. But again, I think I've done a video on the venues that have been announced for training venues and match venues. It's on the channel. It's in the Rugby League playlist. I'm critical of some of the venues, absolutely. I think great opportunity to grow the game nationally, not just in the north of England where it's already strong, but across the country. Massive opportunity to grow the game. But it is what it is. The argument has been made that moving it from Wembley harms the Challenge Cup. Wembley is not the same as what it was 20 years ago. Obviously, the new stadium. There's been a lot of criticism of the Wembley Stadium as it is now. A lot of criticism of Wembley Club, Wembley ticket prices, accessibility. The fact that the majority of the teams come from the north of England. There are other stadiums where you could host the Challenge Cup final. Also, whatever the pros and cons of having it at Wembley, the RFL have signed an agreement where I think they've got another 7 years or 5 years on the agreement, so they can't pull out of hosting games at Wembley unless there's really unforeseen circumstances. So it, the RFL is stuck with having to play the Challenge Cup final at Wembley for the foreseeable future. And then they have said they will review where they're going to play it after the contract that they have in place with the FA and Wembley expires. But it does cost the RFL money to host the game there. And the fact that was the second lowest crowd since the war tells you something that they couldn't sell it out. They couldn't sell out the 3 internationals against New Zealand last year. There were half empty stadiums in the north of England. So rugby league does have a problem whereby I think the RFL aren't necessarily governing the game and growing the game in the best possible way. They're not targeting the south of England with investment. I don't know. I just don't know if they're getting their strategy right for the sport in this country. And we can look over in the NRL and say there's issues there as well, but they are significantly doing better for crowd numbers, participation, membership of clubs, grand finals sellout. Whereas in the UK, you can't sell out a Challenge Cup final for the stadium. That's a concern. Rugby World Cup final. I've got the venue video where I've listed the venues and I've discussed, having certain venues and things like that. I don't know if the final venue's been confirmed yet, but if they've got Wembley as a venue, I think the final might be in London. I have a sneaky suspicion, but we'll have to wait and see where as we get closer to the 2021 World Cup. I mean, that's still 2 years away. Oh God! Look, last year they lost money, and then they wanted Catalan, Toronto, and Toulouse to pay £500,000 each to enter the competition, and they all boycotted. And then when Catalan said, "Look, we're boycotting," they backtracked on how much Catalan would have to pay, but Toronto and Toulouse still boycotted. And one of those two sides in Toronto or Toulouse will be in the Super League next year. And I think the RFL are really harming the growth of the game. They definitely need to have a look at their strategy of growth. There's a minority of fans who are very protectionist as well, but this traditionalist protectionist kind of mentality is holding the sport back, whereas rugby union in the World Cup in 2015 took games all over the country to great success, even to cities that aren't really rugby union cities, such as Newcastle. And they play games at St James's Park. They play games in Brighton. Brighton isn't really a rugby union city; it's a football city. And this is where I think not taking games on the road to these other stadiums, to these other locations, not. I mean, fans don't even want to have the Magic Weekend anymore, really. In either the Super League or the NRL, they've really switched off with the Magic Weekend. There's a lot of complaints I see on social media about the Magic Weekends in both the NRL and Super League. Look, if I think they have, I wouldn't say they've given up on the South. They've launched this new amateur level, and with the Scholars and the Broncos being reasonably decent sides at the level they play at, and attracting decent crowds. And Trailfinders sold out today against Leeds. There was no parking available, so they are attracting fans, but they've got no local rivals to play against to build rivalries with, and that's a problem. The money is there. It's just not being hunted out, and the RFL needs investment. They're losing money on the Challenge Cup final. They're punishing non-English teams to enter the Challenge Cup final by charging them £500,000, and they boycotted, which was a really bad image for the RFL, made them look really out of touch, and not. It wasn't in keeping with the growth of the game. And yeah, if rugby league bosses run a club as bad as they ran the league, we'll have another witness on our hands. The Bradford Bulls look like they're not going to be playing at Odsal for the future. I mean, there are some clubs in real crisis, and the RFL isn't doing enough to help them. The RFL now owns Odsal, and the Bradford Bulls are pulling out because it's just a crap stadium, and it is a run-down stadium to the point where it's a disaster. But the Bradford Bulls also been badly run for over a decade. Um, Clubs in rugby league are going the same way as football, and guess what? You have to look at the TV deal they have in place with Sky. The lack of club games on free-to-air TV is killing, absolutely killing rugby league, and not enough of the Challenge Cup games are shown either live. They cherry pick and they only really go from the quarterfinals onwards. Not enough of the fourth round onwards. They're not enough of the Challenge Cup games. They should show Challenge Cup games from round one through to the final, like they do with the FA Cup. You would find that more money flows into rugby league because they get bigger exposure. There's a TV audience, and people will tune in because it is live sport and it's free to wear live sport. You can grow an audience. How have I been? I was in hospital last week, so not great, not bad. I'm feeling a lot better. Work's stressful, but it's work. It's going to be stressful. You just got to grind it out and just get it done. Work's been busy. As you noticed, I've been putting less videos on the channel in recent weeks because of work. It is what it is. But I'm a lot better than what I was. I've finished my course of medication. My illness has cleared up. My infection's cleared up, so that's good. But still not 100%. Body's aching a little bit. So I'm aiming to take a couple of days off in a couple of weeks and get some rest and recuperation going into the autumn and the winter, because as a bin man, being out in all weathers, it's been really nice this summer for the most part. A few rainy days. It's starting to get cold in the mornings. It's starting to get cold in the afternoons when clouds come over. It's going to get chilly, and of course, being out in hot weather to suddenly very, very cold, I'm feeling it a little bit, and the body's feeling a little bit stiff and sore, but it's part and parcel of being doing a physical job. But otherwise, yeah, I'm okay. I'm still here. The Bradford Bulls are a team that looks at the past. Yeah, the Bradford Bulls are definitely living in the past, and the RFL look at Bradford in the past as well. The RFL are 16 years behind the program. While the Bradford Bulls were a great team, they were a great team, and I can definitely look at the Bradford Bulls and what's going on with the Bradford Bulls in a video. I can definitely look at that, get the old whiteboard out, get the old headset on, and do some writing with the pens and look at Bradford. And while they were a great team, the situation has changed. I mean, you look at the Odsal ground; it's really not. And that defeat to Halifax, that pitch was terrible. Odsall's always had a shocking pitch. The ground itself, uneven, ramshackle. I've done a video on Widnes, entering administration, but I can definitely do a video about Bradford. Absolutely. Sheffield Eagles, I could throw them in there and all. But Bradford Bulls are definitely a team that have an uncertain future again. They've had financial problems, obviously, in the last decade, but their future is very uncertain. And you have to look at the RFL and their governance of the game and the TV deal that's in place, not just for Super League, but for the Championship and League One. And then you also have to look at the TV deal that's in place for the Challenge Cup and go, why are not more Challenge Cup games on free-to-air TV from round one through to the final? We seriously need to look at the whole structures and the transparency financially in the sport of rugby league, because it does risk being really left behind by other sports, and sports like ice hockey are overtaking it for participation and fan base. They are, and this is where this is where I think rugby league is starting to be badly run. They are running it as if it's still the 1950s and not nearly 2020. They are 60, 70 years behind where they should actually be thinking. And that is a question that is not going away and needs to be considered about the structures and the governance. And we're talking about this with the EFL, with football, and the FA and the Premier League with governance and transparency, and where's the money coming from and where's the money going. We're asking the same questions about rugby league. We've been asking the same questions about rugby union, because professionalism, not all teams can afford to pay their players, centralised contracts, all this. ECB with cricket, Sky's got them by the balls. If Sky wants to change the TV deal, the ECB's in trouble. They're forcing the 100 down our throats. No one wants it apart from Sky, but uh, professional sport in this country has a problem. I think the only professional sport in this country that has a decent TV deal that's just right for the sport and enough clubs in a healthy position actually is ice hockey, ironically. Yeah, respect to me if don't turn up, you guys are missed. Well, we're underpaid, we're overworked, and we're over, and yeah, it's a smelly job. Someone's got to do it. My depot is threatening strike action. We're short staffed. We haven't got enough drivers. We haven't got enough loaders. There's industrial action plans, so it's not all rosy being a bin man. But you know, I just get on with my work. Really, I just do my job. It needs to be done. You know, some days, I mean, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays are our best days for my depot. Wednesdays and Thursdays are the days that they can drag on till 3, 4 in the afternoon. Thursday, I didn't finish until no, Friday. I didn't finish until gone 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Started at 5:30 in the morning, didn't finish till 4 in the afternoon. So, um, yeah, it's not all fun. Some days can be near on 10, 12 hour days. So it's not all fun, but it has to be done. Aberdeen Dundee, it's great that you can afford to go to a game. I mean, I would love to catch a London Broncos game. Might have to catch a Broncos game next season at Trailfinders and Ealing. Might even go to a Scholars game as well. I am going to a Bracknell Bees game next weekend with a friend from work. We're going down because he plays amateur ice hockey anyway. So we're going to catch a game next Sunday, which should be fun. Real good laugh. Yeah, I haven't been to a football match in years, over a decade. Over a decade since I've been to a football match. Carnegie, well, they used to be Leeds, didn't they? They used to be Leeds Rugby Union club. The whole Headingley thing, I mean, Leeds is a sports mad city. It is. You've got the Leeds Chiefs ice hockey team playing their inaugural season. They play their inaugural regular season game against the Sheffield Steel Dogs on I think the 15th. So in 2 weeks' time. But their home rink isn't finished yet. Down in Ellen Road, next to the football stadium. Headingley, there've been a lot of building work there, and that's cost a lot of money. And I don't know. And the Leeds Rhinos aren't playing great this season either. They're in a bit of a dogfight to avoid relegation. I think they're probably safe, if truth be told, with the win over the Broncos today. But the Leeds Rhinos aren't the team they were. Yorkshire Carnegie, they haven't been in the Premiership for a long time now in rugby union. Do they attract the crowds up there? With the stadium rebuild and the cricket ground, the stadium stand rebuilds there, that's cost a lot of money. And who's paying for that? That kind of thing. And Leeds Rhinos have had a poor season as well. So I don't know who owns if Yorkshire Carnegie. I think are owned by the same people who own the Leeds Rhinos. There could be a money flow problem, and that can have an effect going forward. I don't know. Leeds is a very, I wouldn't say affluent. It's more affluent than some of the other cities in the area and some of the towns in the area. It's a university city. It's a sportsman city. I'm really surprised that the team is in that situation, if that is the case. But again, this is apparently, and this is where we need more transparency about the health of sport and are the TV deals in place really benefiting all sports? Should we need to look at more free to wear coverage for some of the minor leagues just to get them a bit more exposure and a bit more growth? Yeah, rugby league is its expansion to Wales. That was down to the rugby union basically forcing it to struggle. Union and league in Wales have been at war for years, but the funding for the Welsh Rugby League is atrocious. And look at the standard of the Welsh Rugby League player. There's the national side is so far behind where it should be. Only I think one or two of the Welsh players like Kopchik, for example, and Grace can get into the Great Britain side. If you were to name a Great Britain side now, It is what it is. But no, rugby league could definitely fall behind other sports. Their attempts in Wales to improve it were an absolute shambles. But the Rugby Union of Wales, the WRU, were trying its best to sabotage any attempt for rugby league to grow. I think the chairman of Rugby Union saying we need to look at the world rankings because Wales were number one, having never beaten New Zealand, is BS because now Ireland are number one and they have beaten New Zealand, and New Zealand have looked human. It's down to strength of opposition, amount of wins, and Wales had 17 wins in a row. And I had a lot of hassle from Welsh Rugby Union fans over my views on the Welsh national side and how they play. Apparently, they can't take criticism of victory or defeat, and they're a toxic fan base. But when it comes to ranking system, world rankings are flawed anyway. You look at the FIFA world rankings are massively flawed when it comes to football. You look at the cricket ICC world rankings for Test, one days, and T20s. Again, flawed to a point. World rankings in a whole host of sports are flawed. But the All Blacks aren't number one anymore. Ireland are now the number one side. So how do you change the point system? How do you do it? Because it goes on strength of opposition, the amount of games you play. Some teams play less internationals than others in a year. New Zealand always play high quality opposition until the World Cup when they play the lower quality opposition. It's a flawed system. Ireland are now the number one team, and they haven't had the best 2019 so far. They've had a record defeat to England, yet they're still number one. But they beat the All Blacks twice in 2 years. So, considering they've played the All Blacks, I think 3 or 4 times, they've won 2 of those games, lost 2 of those games. So I don't know how you do the world rankings. I think Ireland are more deserving of the number one spot over the last 2-3 years of play in the World Cup cycle. In the last 3-4 years, Ireland are better than Wales. But you've got to look at the data that's put in. Who you're playing? How many games a year do you play? How many games have you won, drawn, or lost? A whole factor of things. What ranking was that team you play? A whole load of data goes in there, and at the end, it just spews it out. And here's your ranking coefficient. And you look at the top 12 to 16 teams, and that's your knockout teams for the World Cup. Generally speaking, there are 1 or 2 teams that you could swap around, but that's generally speaking who's going to be in the knockout stages of the World Cup come the quarterfinals. I think, if Wales win all the games, at least the All Blacks, and the All Blacks lose to everyone except Wales, does that mean the All Blacks number one? No. You've got to look at the consistency of the whole form book and who they have played. Wales went on the longest winning streak in their nation's history. It's still not a record winning streak, but it nearly was, and it equaled a previous winning streak of South Africa. So on 12 months or 12-month cycle, Wales were one of the best sides. Absolutely. And these August tests are at a really weird time. You're not normally playing test matches in August and the beginning of September. You're normally in your pre-season for the regular season to start. Because the World Cup is in Japan and the time they've scheduled it, it's sort of skewed with the international calendar and the club calendar. So I think yes, it's a flawed system. It's an imperfect system, but it does sort of tend to work because you look at those sides that are in the top 10, top 12, top 16, and out of that, all your quarterfinalists for the World Cup will come from those sides. Football, however, the FIFA world rankings are exceptionally flawed. At one point, I think the US were ranked 3rd or 4th in the world in the men's game. So that just tells you how flawed the men's FIFA rankings are for football. But any ranking system is flawed. It's limited by the data you put into it. Hi, Rob from Tampa. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream. If you've got any questions, please place them in the comment section. But yeah, I also agree. I don't think you need to change the ranking system. I'm not really fussed where a team's ranked at the end of the day. Only those advanced stats nerds really care about it. Your regular fan just wants their team to win. Really, it doesn't matter. I think the rankings are an unnecessary distraction, and they're not really as important as you think. Players say, "Oh yeah, we want to be the best team in the world." Right, if you're ranked 1 in the world before the World Cup and you fall at the group stage, like Ireland could, then it's flawed. It's pointless. You want to win the World Cup, and every time there's an earthquake or hurricane, I'm messaging them. I've got a friend in Texas, and yeah, when that hurricane hit Texas a couple of years ago, she sent me a photograph of a bull shark swimming up her road because uh, the amount of water that came in and it just surged up the floodplains. It was not nice, but I hope you're all okay, and I hope the damage is not as severe as it could be, and fatalities are minimal and injuries are minimal, and you get through it because it's not pleasant. But we'll see what happens, and hopefully the effects are limited, and things are okay. Storm passes and damage is minimal. The rugby union world rankings, I think, to a point, yes, I think you could say better than most sports, absolutely. Um, but again, it is limited by the data they use to put in uh, to formulate the rankings. Ireland were top yesterday after beating Wales. Obviously, the All Blacks are playing in the Rugby Championship. England, I find it weird that Wales, who've had the better record out of the four nations in the last 12 months, are fourth. That's what I find weird. A winning streak, unbeaten streak of 17 games. And while I can criticise how the Welsh play and how antiseptic it can be at times, they are a very effective team at playing. So this is why I think the rankings are flawed, because the All Blacks, Ireland, England and Wales have all lost games in the last couple of weeks. But you have to look at the whole 12-month period since the equivalent time 12 months ago, and the form since September the 1st last year. And every time the rankings change, you have to look at the equivalent period 12 months ago and go, right, this time exactly 365 days ago, 12 months ago, this team were here. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think the All Blacks are necessarily going to win this one. I think they are showing real frailties in the last couple of years. They're not the team that they were in 2015, and they're not the team they were in 2011. I think they've had their cycle of winning, and they are vulnerable. I do think they're very, very vulnerable right now. I think you could say that a Northern Hemisphere side has an opportunity to win. The World Cup is in the Northern Hemisphere. And the All Blacks, last World Cup notwithstanding, have actually struggled away from New Zealand in the World Cup. Australia had that big win over them a couple of weeks ago. So it shows that Australia can win a match, a one-off game without Israel Folau. South Africa are looking very, very tasty right now and are being underestimated by a lot of people. Anything could happen. I think it's the most open World Cup that we could have ever seen. I think it's more open than people realise. Some of the tier 2 nations are massively improved and are massively improving their professionalism and their growth of the game. So there's going to be some upsets in this World Cup, and I think there's definitely going to be some interesting results in a very open tournament. I don't think the All Blacks are dead cert to win. I think they are. I don't think they're dead cert to win at all. I think it's a very open tournament. I think it's one of 6 or 7 teams could win. Japan are very improved, absolutely, but I think you've got to look at the USA and Uruguay as 2 teams of the tier 2 nations that are massively improved. Fiji, while the Fijian scrum, I think, is their weakness and their discipline, their athleticism and their skills are plain for all to see. Same with Tonga, that they are a threat, and they've proven that they can also beat tier 1 nations. Fiji have been to the knockout stages before. It's very open. It's very, very open. I really I think it's the most open tournament ever, I think, when it comes to the World Cup. There are issues with rugby union finances, and they're saying, we need to. I think Canada possibly could be the weakest. I think Canada could do better than people expect, but Canadian rugby the last 4, 5, 6 years hasn't been great. The USA has overtaken them. Uruguay have overtaken them. And they need to look at why things are going wrong with Canadian rugby. The Brazilians are catching them up in their tournament. So the Canadians need to look long and hard at their development programs, what they have in place, because yeah, they are struggling. Russia, they got qualified by virtue of Spain and Romania getting thrown out, and that's the first for Romania not making the World Cup. So Russia, are lucky to be in the tournament. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You know, these are warm up games though. So losing to Jersey, they probably were experimenting with their lineup. They're probably experimenting with tactics. I wouldn't read too much into that. I don't. I don't. Uh, I don't. I don't. I don't read too much into what I call pre-season. Basically, there's a lot going on, and the rugby union does have other issues other than just the ranking system. Um, I think Namibia could win a game. Yeah, Namibia have players who do play in Super Rugby, but they don't have Jacques Berger anymore leading them as their talismanic leader. So Namibia, they could spring an upset on Canada. Canada were the last team to ensure their qualification. That tells you something about where Canada have slipped in the world rankings, kind of, and in the world order over the years. But I still think it's a very open tournament. I think Canada are probably the weakest team, Namibia as well, possibly, and the Russians. But it's going to be an interesting tournament. I've looked at the groups. I've done my preview. You know, that was back in March. My thoughts haven't changed on the preview that I did back in March. My thoughts are still as they were then, as they are now. I still think New Zealand are vulnerable. I still think it's a very open tournament. There's going to be one or two lopsided results. I think the Russians will get hammered. I think the Namibians and Canadians will struggle to a point, but you know, how is the game going to grow without these nations participating? So it's one of them. Oh yeah, I think Namibia. I think the domestic quality isn't great, but they have players that play Super Rugby. They have players that have played in Europe, and you know they are a proud people. It's a rugby mad nation, and they are physically fit, and they won't give up. I will tell you that they're going to keep playing until the final whistle in every game. You know they know the limitations of their players. They know the limitations of their squad, but team unity can take you a long way in a journey like the World Cup. It can. And they're there to put themselves in the shop window for other professional teams to sign those players as well. They are advertising themselves as professional players. So it's going to be interesting to see how all the teams do. Absolutely. I think the Canadians. It's going to be a rude. The Canadians. I think it's going to be a rude shock to the system. I think they've been struggling for so long that when they do come up against these real quality players and quality teams, they could get a hiding. Yeah, Christian Wade has only made the practice squad, but this is this NFL International Pathways program. The NFL is starting to take rugby union, rugby league more seriously. We're seeing several NRL players give the NFL a go. We've seen Jared Hayne, we've seen Valentine Holmes, we've now seen Christian Wade. The NFL is starting to look at rugby union and looking at certain types of player, mostly wingers, ironically, that all three of them are wingers and fullbacks. That's their position in league and union. So the NFL is looking at these running backs basically. And they would have made an actual career out of it. I think it's is it the NFL doing a good bit of PR? I don't know. The international pathway, there's been some US rugby players who've gone between the NFL and rugby union. They wouldn't be household names to us, but I do know some US players have done that kind of pathway. Jordan Malitia is still involved with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a draft pick. He hasn't gone back to rugby league. So it's an interesting one. I don't know how successful the pathway is for percentage of those who swap rugby league, rugby union, or another contact sport like AFL and decide to go to um, the NFL. I don't know what the success rate is because you're going against guys who've been playing American football since junior high, some of them. So that is a big change, but I think uh, it'll be. Uh, It'll be interesting. Do I think 20 teams is the right number of teams for the Rugby Union World Cup? The Rugby League World Cup will be 16 teams, 4 pools of 4. Um, there's always a debate about the size of a tournament. So the World Cup, Football World Cup, was the biggest World Cup. It's going to get bigger, and people are debating, well, 32 is enough. Why go to, I think, 40 odd teams? The Euros has expanded, and people are saying that's too much when it comes to football. The debate's always out there for size of league or size of competition, and not everyone will be satisfied. Um, but there is, I think, a perfect limit. I think when it comes to leagues like the NHL, 32 teams, perfect. When we look at the Football World Cup, I think 32 is the perfect number of teams. They want to expand that past that, and I think that's pushing it a little bit too far for the fixturing because these players need time off. Rugby union, rugby league, 20 to 16. I think that's nearly right. I think you're nearly right there. I think 24 at a push for rugby union. You could sort of have a second round then. But you look at Samoa, 1 draw and 2 losses. That was shambolic. But that's how the point system works. That's how the win-loss thing works. The head-to-head works, and that's because you've got 4 pools of 4 teams. I think you might have to expand the Rugby League World Cup, but then the quality of team that you'd be putting there will be not good enough. So this is where Rugby League has an issue with international depth. But there are some interesting questions being thrown up. Absolutely, I think, but no one's ever happy with how big a tournament should be, how many pools or how many group stage. Do we have a second round? Do we have a quarter? No one seems to be fully happy. One group of fans is always happy. I think rugby union's got more depth than rugby league, and that is shown out with the size of the tournaments. Rugby league, it doesn't have the depth to have the tournament bigger than 16 teams. The quality drop off is huge after that. Rugby union seems to have more national depth, but it's always seemingly the same nations qualifying or be on the edge of qualifying over and over again. The Russians have been at the World Cup before. Spain and Romania would have qualified for the World Cup. One of those two have. The Spanish have been at the World Cup before. So what we've noticed with the World Cup is the same nations keep qualifying for the World Cup in the rugby union. Rugby league, again, the lack of depth, it drops off a cliff outside the top 16, 18 nations in the world. It just drops off a cliff completely. So the debate about how, is there the right amount of teams? Is there the right amount of is it the right size? Should they include more nations? Is been ongoing for years. No one's ever happy with the size of a tournament. I think the Football World Cup, I think, is going too far. I think 32 is the limit for a successful tournament, and working out the permutations of who qualifies from what group. Look at the World Championships in the ice hockey. I think they got that just about right with how they broke that up into the various groups. I think they got that right there. But it's down to tournament organisers as well, and the governing bodies, and this is what they want. But then you've got to sell that sport and that organised and that way it's broken up media package to a TV company or companies or media companies to stream online and on TV, and then you got to sell the media rights, and that's a thing in itself. So the media has a part to play in how big a tournament is, because this is why the Football World Cup keeps expanding. Is because it's a global game, and the global audience wants to see more quality and more teams. It's what the fan base wants, apparently, according to the media. But there are some going, I think we've gone too far. But it is what it is. If your team gets in, it's great, and if your team is beaten by a new team, it's embarrassing. But how is the sport meant to grow otherwise? How is the player depth meant to grow? How is the reach of the sport meant to grow? And I think this is where the Lions tour to New Zealand, Fiji, and PNG is going to help with rugby league. Absolutely. It would have been nice to see them play Australia, but I think they've still got three tough opponents, and PNG in Port Moresby in that in the southern hemisphere summer in the tropics. That's going to be brutal, brutal in Port Moresby against PNG. No, I don't think they could put a tournament together. I don't think rugby union's quite got that depth yet. And there are money issues in rugby union. Rugby league is just outside of England and France, or Great Britain and France, and Australia, New Zealand, and PNG and Fiji and Tonga. That's your top nations. They're your nations who are going to be if you put Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Tonga, PNG, Great Britain, really, realistically, pretty much England with a couple of Scottish and Welsh and Irish players in there, and France. They're your top nations. That's where your top professionals play from. And then you've got obviously the Italians and the Irish and and then some of the second string nations coming through. But they don't have enough top level professionals to really compete, and that's the issue. Um, that's where the problem lies. I've just named pretty much half the Rugby League World Cup and say that here's where your competing nations are, here's where your next batch of nations are. Like Samoa is that sort of stuck in between a rock and a hard place financially. It's got the quality players, but it just hasn't got the money. This is the situation. This is what we have. So make of that what you will with the Rugby League World Cup. Rugby union seems to have more nation depth, but even so, not every country has a professional league playing in it, and this is where I think football has surged ahead. And when it comes to ice hockey, those playing nations in ice hockey, most of them have a professional team somewhere. Most of them are European based and have a professional league. And that's why those tournaments work, is because there is that player depth of professionals. But there we go. I do believe there is an Australian series coming to the UK to play um, the um, the Lions. Yes, Florida Panthers. I think they've underperformed as a team. 96 notwithstanding, their playoff form has been poor, and they've not had playoff success. Their location could be better. They could, have instead of being in Sunrise, they could be in inside Miami, proper. But hey, this season looks good for them. They've got Joel Quenville behind the bench. They've got some good players. I still think they need another goaltender, maybe. But they have a very good chance of not only making the playoffs, but doing something in the playoffs. And they've also had some great players play for them in the past as well. And that 96 run to the Stanley Cup final is one of great fame. One of the first Stanley Cup finals playoff series that I actually watched. I was 7 at the time, or nearly 7. So the Florida Panthers, I think, they've had some good players, but their lack of playoff success and their issues with attendance are what's holding the team back. I think, well, they've got a long-term lease with the BB&T Centre in Sunrise, Florida. I've gone over this before a few times. They need to be in downtown Miami, personally. If I was, the owner, I would move them, but I would keep them in Florida, absolutely. But they are a decent side, and I think they're going to have a very, very decent season. They could be a dark horse this season. No, it wouldn't happen in the UK. Wouldn't happen in the UK. The only team that's really moved far at a professional level in a professional league is Wimbledon, the old Wimbledon, AFC Wimbledon, moving to Milton Keynes, becoming MK Dons. It doesn't happen. We're a club-based system, not a franchise-based system. That's the difference. That is the massive difference. Here we're club-based, which is local community, founded locally. It's a member of the league. It's a members-only league kind of thing, not a franchise. So the sporting culture is different. It rarely happens in Europe. It happens obviously regularly in North America, but rarely in Europe. But even now in North America, they're very averse to relocating teams. They make less money that way. They're more up for expansion or consolidation. And what we're seeing with the NHL is they want to strike a national TV deal with the US networks rather than regional ones. But I think it's a I don't know. Again, it's the sporting cultures between Europe and North America are different. Uh, the Hurricanes in the Bahamas. I do have a friend who lives in Miami, so I'll be messaging him this evening and see how he's all prepared and how he's doing. And I hope he's okay. And I hope you sit out as well and you come out the other side and the damage isn't as bad as it could be, and you're all good come morning. Anyway, I'm gonna go for now. Thank you very much for participating and asking loads of questions this evening. I really appreciate it. There are lots of interesting things we've discussed. I'll have more videos for you in the week. Obviously busy at work as well, but I've got to have some more videos for you in the week. And goodbye for now. And thank you very, very much for everyone participating and all the questions. And to you, Robbie, good luck with the hurricane. Hope you're okay and you're prepared and you've got everything. And hopefully the weather isn't as bad as it could be, and the damage is less than it could be as well. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all very, very soon.